Hello and welcome to the Ozma in the Dark sort of channel. I am Ozma in the Dark. I have brown hair, blue eyes, am white AF, and wearing a gray shirt, which you can't see any of the details on. I do have a dwagon emoji in the upper left-hand side of the screen at the moment, and the dwagon emoji is usually near my image, like the video I have. So, today I was going to read more of the cursed, the cursed OG Turf book, but I didn't upload that to my Dropbox. I forgot to upload it to my Dropbox, and given that I am not at my normal place of residence, nor am I on my computer, I'm on a computer that I have permission to use while taking care of cats that I also do not own. And I'd made the agreement to take care of the cats. But like, so there are count them, four potential things to watch. I don't like to have some of the stuff showing. So we have, and by the way, if you think of something else that would be more enjoyable to watch, go ahead and mention. But here are the six things I can count. So Jordan Peterson doesn't understand gender discrimination. The Jordan Peterson clips about audio about his grandmother. A dream he had about his grandmother. It's an audio of Jordan Peterson saying it. Anyways, a Xander Hall video about moving forward, just because I was curious. Given that Xander Hall has blocked me and I haven't heard much about Xander Hall, I was curious what this was about. Sterling, the James Stephanie Sterling's their video on some video game stuff. Honestly, it was just an excuse to watch one of those videos. Something done by Vaush, and why a dog keeps you safer than a gun. Or something potentially really dumb by Vaush, and why a dog keeps you safer than a gun. The last video is just there for, you know, to maybe wrap things up. I mean, obviously, if you enjoy what's going on, and that's fine. And like I said, sorry. If you just popped in, sorry I couldn't get the book thing, the PDF. The PDF I was not transferred properly to this computer, so it is not here. So this is Plan B. Now let me move this up to 2x speed because it's a lot of stuff.
Hello everybody, today we are going to talk about Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist who became one of the world's most famous academics on the back of YouTube.
Well, I don't... Which gold thing is this? It's Twitch follow, but it's not doing Twitch. Okay, why does that not go away? And also, sorry about that. There was also I had to mute myself a little bit just to try to avoid outing my mom. Oh, okay, I do have a follower goal. That's wildly inaccurate, so I'm just gonna have that hide because I feel like it's blocking subtitles. Or so, and I don't want to block subtitles. I can help it.
Self-help lectures which found a large audience among young men. He's released books which explore topics like meaning and how to live your life. I know. There's a lot about Jordan Peterson out there, and there's even a subreddit dedicated to the fact that people talk about him too much. It's also 2022, so arguably I've missed the Peterson boat, but I've not seen a comprehensive response, on YouTube at least, to his characterization of the scientific literature on the subject of gender discrimination. Is that really one of my opening lines? That is very boring.
Yeah, it's pretty dull, bro.
Peterson has a reputation for absolutely destroying feminist narratives about male economic dominance in his interviews and debates.
We're just normal men. What do you mean normal?
Wait, why was the message retracted? Now I'm curious why the message was retracted. What happened? Oh, but yeah, if you're new here, if you just pop, I saw someone pop in. I probably don't need to say this every time someone pops in, but yeah, PDF transfer problems, backup stuff. So just a little bit of it's a bit random today.
Oh man, we're just innocent men.
But I'm not sure that Peterson has fully grasped the studies he uses to support his arguments. He is more confident in his interpretation of the findings than is justified.
I know the literature, and it says exactly what I said it says.
Peterson has two main pieces of evidence to support his claim that gender discrimination is not a major factor in women's economic outcomes. First, multivariate analysis of the gender pay gap, where Peterson claims that controlling for things like occupation and personality eliminates the earnings differences between men and women. Two, the so-called gender equality paradox, where Peterson claims that differences between men and women are larger in more gender-equal countries. If you don't know what these things really mean, then sit tight because we're going to go through them in excruciating detail. Certainly more detail than Peterson, who has a habit of spamming research links after making sweeping claims. In both cases, I want to illustrate two things. Firstly, the evidence cited by Peterson is essentially irrelevant for determining whether or not women face discrimination. Secondly, more rigorous evidence demonstrates that women do.
Ooey Dragon. I like random. Good. You.
In fact, face discrimination.
All right.
Good. For this is very random. And this video might. I'm testing it out. I'm concerned I agree too much, and there's not a lot to analyze. It's not.
I understand the situation. You're a girl.
Yes.
Oh, gosh darn it! I just don't understand the situation. You're a girl.
So, this video will take the following structure. Firstly, critiquing Peterson on multivariate analysis of the gender pay gap.
And the other thing is, I don't know how much Peterson cares about the accuracy, obviously, but yeah, it is helpful to break down these things for just to understand the gender pay gap in general, because I am curious about the details of that.
Specifically showing that it doesn't speak directly to the question of whether women face discrimination in employment. Secondly, showing that women do face substantial discrimination in employment using quantitative research. Thirdly, critiquing Peterson on the gender equality paradox, again showing that the finding doesn't speak directly to the question of discrimination. Finally, using historical evidence and cross-country comparisons to give a different interpretation of how countries came to be where they are on different aspects of gender equality. I also have some good news. Throughout this video, I'm going to refrain from doing a Jordan Peterson impression. It's just so overdone, you know. I'm not going to do it. Right, start the bloody video. The gender pay gap has to be one of the most controversial topics on the internet, and is one of the topics that aided Jordan Peterson's rise to stardom. In his infamous interview with Cathy Newman, the topic is highlighted in the title and takes up a substantial proportion of the interview. The myth of the gender pay gap is a talking point for people adjacent to Peterson, such as Joe Rogan.
I had an argument with someone about the wage gap. They really believe that men and women work right next to each other doing the same job, and the woman's only making 75 cents to the guy's dollar. I'm like,
That's put out there.
but this is a crazy thing to argue.
It is true that there's some miscommunication out there surrounding the 70-ish% figure. Take the TV show Rick and Morty.
Then this one is not your slave, and your Earth is yet another planet dominated by men.
It's not dominated by us, okay? On Earth, men and women are equals.
Equals. We make 70% of your salary for the same job.
This is actually untrue, since that figure is not adjusted for the type of job and other variables that may differ between men and women.
If you're a social scientist, worth your salt, you never do a univariate analysis. Like you say, well, women in aggregate are paid less than men. Okay, well then we break it down by age, we break it down by occupation, we break it down by interest, we break it down by personality.
When you make this adjustment, the number is closer to 90%. This is still a lot. I'm sure nobody.
Cass is good. Yeah. I think because the thing is, gender discrimination is complicated, and I think my knowledge of it is somewhat limited. But I'm generally of the understanding that if women get into certain types of work, then as soon as women start getting into certain types of work, the overall pay was decreased, causing women to, on average, earn significantly less than men. But yeah. But also, there is also systemic discrimination. Maybe I do know more than I think I do, but yeah.
Watching would be happy to endure a 10% long-term pay cut, but it's smaller because 70 is less than 90. Hit like and subscribe, everyone. In fact, there are a number of different ways we can look at the gender pay gap. If we restrict it to pay for the same job, it's around 10%. If we
Okay, yeah, restricted pay for same job, restricted pay for those in full-time work, it's around 20.
Restricted to pay for those in full-time work is around 20%. If we just take the average income of men and women, whether in work or not, it's around 40%. That last one may surprise you, but what I'm saying is, take an average man and an average woman in the USA with no knowledge of their employment status, caring responsibilities, or other demographic variables, the woman will have about 60% of the income of the man. All of these statistics matter in different ways. The pay gap for men versus women in the same job makes a direct point about differences in.
So all of those are pay gaps. I probably shouldn't. Let me. Your way to. Well.
How men and women are treated, even when they're doing the exact same work. The pay gap for those in full-time work makes sense because earnings are tied directly to employment. The average pay gap for all men and all women matters because it tells us about the access men and women have to resources. More on this later. One of the mistakes Jordan Peterson and critics of the gender pay gap make is to suppose that only the first statistic is what we care about. On top of this, they frequently imply that the difference is zero even though it isn't.
But it's still being dominated and excluded, to quote your words back to you.
It does seem that way, but multivariate analysis of the pay gap indicate that it doesn't exist.
That's
So
But yeah, I mean, the problem is when there is actual lie. There are people who are willing to lie, just flat out lie.
That's 9% pay gap. That's a gap between median hourly earnings between men and women.
But they're
That exists.
multiple.
You can see that Kathy Newman actually got the pay gap for the same work roughly right based on the statistics we've seen, whereas Peterson is wrong. But putting that to one side, the number one point of contention I have is on the 10% versus the 20% statistic. It's not uncommon for people to claim the pay disparity simply reflects men and women freely making different choices. To understand this better, let's learn a little bit about the statistical methods behind these findings. When we use causal inference, we want to know the effect one thing has on another. Think about education and wages. We expect that people with more qualifications will earn higher wages, at least on average. Our starting point would probably be to look at the correlation between education and wages, and in most datasets we will indeed find that this is a positive correlation. But this is obviously a crude comparison, because there are other things out there that could be driving the correlation. People with more education may come from richer backgrounds, and coming from a richer background could also help you in getting a high-paying job. People with more education also tend to be more academically able, which may get them a higher wage independently of the education itself. Socioeconomic status, ability, location, parents, these are all examples of confounding variables, which complicate our simple correlation between education and wages. One solution in statistics is to control for these confounders, which we can do if we have measures of them, as well as our measures of qualifications and earnings.
Yeah, I mean, generally you want to take an assessment of that's true with all variables. You want to isolate any study from the various variable factors, so you know the causal thing. Basically what this person said, but they said it better probably.
If we can control for confounding variables, we'll get an estimate of how much, say, getting a degree will increase earnings for someone in a given location whose parents earned a given amount, who has a given level of ability, and so on. This is the multivariate analysis referenced by Peterson in the interview. Multivariate because it uses multiple variables, like occupation or location. You get it. So far, so good. Just control for everything we can, right? If we want to isolate the effect of education on wages, just throw everything in. Well, there are practical considerations over what we can measure and what methods we use to control.
You extra can't spell today? Yeah, I mean, that happens.
These things can vary, which can affect our conclusions. More importantly for this video, there are some types of variables we simply do not want to control for, and they are creatively called bad controls. Think about the occupation of the person earning. If I were to control for this when estimating the effect of education on earnings, it would greatly reduce that effect. The reason is simple. People with higher levels of education go into different jobs to those with lower levels of education. Getting a better job is one of the main ways education increases your earnings, something people know pretty well. But it would be a mistake to conclude that there is no gain in earnings from education just because the difference disappears when we control for occupation. We have explained the difference, but this is not the same as explaining it away. It's still the case that education increases earnings. We've just found that occupation is the mechanism through which that happens. Now, in case you haven't spotted my devious plan, try substituting gender for education in our example. If women work in different occupations or carry different responsibilities, these things may reduce their pay. But noticing that these are the mechanisms does not mean the pay gap doesn't exist. It just tells us how it comes about.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's actually a good breakdown of that.
The fact that controlling for occupation doesn't tell us anything about whether discrimination is taking place is easily illustrated through the TV show Mad Men. In the 1960s advertising business, there were basically two distinct career paths for men and for women. Women would get secretarial roles, which were shitty and low paid with minimal possibility for promotion.
I don't know what your goals are, but don't overdo it with perfume. Keep a fifth of something in your desk. Mr. Draper drinks rye.
Men would get executive advertising roles, where they were better paid, better treated, better regarded, and ultimately had a shot at becoming partners of the firm.
Good morning, Mr. Draper. Oh, and Mr. Sterling, how are you?
What are you?
If you've seen Mad Men, the idea that there is sexism and discrimination against women barely needs mentioning.
And I love it when they do that. My little blue fish.
Anybody mind if I take off my pants?
The secret protagonist of the story, Peggy Olson, is the first example of bucking this trend as she moves from
I read it. M's comment as a Scooby-Doo voice. I extra can't spell Renee. Maggie. No,
secretarial into advertising work. She continually faces sexist remarks and resistance from men.
Well, you're not the landing party we expected. Would you be able to tell them what's so special about your panties?
The benefits are listed there, but basically they're more sheer, softer, and more like silk to the touch, yet still very strong.
You can pull them down over and over.
Here's the thing. Men and women work in different jobs in Mad Men, so if you were to control for occupation in a statistical analysis of Mad Men, the gender pay gap would disappear. But this would tell us nothing about the overwhelming amount of discrimination taking place. We'll establish that discrimination is taking place in the real world, surely, but the point I want you to take away for now is this. Controlling for bad controls, like occupation, does not prove that discrimination isn't a major factor in the gender pay gap. What I've said so far doesn't prove discrimination is a major factor either. Multivariate analysis is just not directly relevant to the question of discrimination, despite Peterson citing it as if it is. He also makes some very specific comments about to what degree different factors contribute to the gender pay gap that I want to address.
By and large, women are too agreeable to get pay rises based on.
I'm saying that that's one component of a multivariate equation that predicts salary. It accounts for maybe 5% of the variance, something like that.
So surely
we need about another 18 factors, one of which is gender. And there is prejudice, there's no doubt about that. But it accounts for a much smaller proportion of the variance in the pay gap than the radical feminists claim.
He seems to be drawing directly from the statistical literature here, though it's unclear exactly which study he is using. One paper
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can there's a debate technique about throwing too many variables, and sometimes conservatives like to throw a lot of variables at people, so they're just like this and this and this and this, and then you have to, while you're trying to disprove one, they throw like 5 more at you, sort of like almost like a scattershot effect. And I assume that's what Jordan Peterson was doing there, because ultimately Jordan Peterson doesn't have the expertise pretending to, and because neither of them are looking at the study, it's hard to discern whether or not the information he's even saying is accurate without asking him first.
I found helpful, which uses this kind of approach, is the 2017 review of the gender pay gap by Blow and Kahn. I have my doubts about some of their methods, as they are often only as good as their assumptions, but I'm trying to address Peterson on his own terms here. In this paper, they find that occupation and industry explain about half the gender pay gap. They also find that so-called unexplained factors account for over a third of the gender pay gap. This is why I find Peterson's insistence that there are numerous factors that explain it, and we can't just speak about one, kind of sophistical. It actually reminds me of former UK Prime Minister Theresa May.
In the National Health Service, we're putting £10 billion
I'm
extra into
sorry,
it.
Prime
Look,
Minister, we have nurses going to food banks at the moment. That must be wrong.
we have, and there are many complex reasons why people go to food banks.
According to this paper at least, factors which could easily be considered outcomes of discrimination explain the vast majority of the gender pay gap, 89% of it, according to Table 4 of the paper. You can include 18 different variables in the statistical analysis, but that doesn't mean they really matter. Peterson also spends quite a lot of time discussing psychological factors that contribute to the gender pay gap. This is understandable because he's a psychologist, so presumably he thinks these things matter. But estimates of just how much they do vary in the literature. Some studies find that they only explain 2.5% of the gender pay gap, while others find that they explain up to 28%. But even if we take the higher estimate here, finding that personality matters doesn't rule out that gender discrimination is taking place. To see this, let's use Peterson's example of agreeableness.
Okay. There's a personality trait known as agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate and polite. And agreeable people get paid less than less agreeable people for the same job. Women are more agreeable than men.
There is more nuance than Peterson is letting on here. As the Blow and Kahn review states,
perhaps not surprising given labour market realities, Wayland Plug, 2006, finds in a regression context that men earned a premium for being disagreeable. However, this attribute was not found to be related to women's wages. Thus, the gender difference in agreeableness contributed to the gender earnings gap, both because men were considerably more disagreeable than women, but also because only men were rewarded for this trait. These findings hint at a double bind for women. As in the case of negotiation discussed below, women face potential penalties for not engaging in this behaviour. But if they do, may elicit negative or less positive responses than men. Also striking is Manning and Swafield's 2008 finding noted above, that psychological attributes accounted for a much larger share of the gender wage gap using male than female coefficients.
So women displaying...
Gotcha. So lose-lose situations if you're... unless you're a man. Yeah, that does sound like society.
Certain personality traits, such as being disagreeable, may not translate into increased earnings. But when men display the exact same behaviors, they may be rewarded.
All right, let's spend many hours on this. All right, the main duck, what's his name? I don't know. Red Hiney Monkey? I love it. All right, now what's his wacky neighbor duck's name?
Giddy Goose?
Meg, please try to formulate ideas clearly before you vocalize them. I'm not sure you're getting the show, Meg.
Even if we grant that personality traits are fixed, biological, and different between men and women, this doesn't tell us whether or not women face discrimination. What's important is the interaction between the traits and the environment. So basically, to change the outcomes, you need social and economic change rather than individual change. And my room is fucking spotless, Jordan, so don't even bring that shit up. He always tells people to clean their room. Whether men and
Yes, he does always tell people to man up and clean their rooms. Just okay, that is funny. That is a funny bit of randomness.
women are different is not the same question as whether or not women face discrimination. They can be linked, and there are interesting questions to ask about the interactions between the two, as we've just done. But I'm not especially concerned in this video with detailing the biological differences between men and women. In fact, I often find that the two debates get conflated. As we're about to see, we can determine whether or not women face discrimination virtually independently of questions about nature versus nurture. One thing is for sure though, multivariate analysis of the gender pay gap has little to say about whether or not discrimination is taking place. Putting in bad controls like occupation reduce the gender pay gap precisely because they explain it. But this statistical exercise is basically neutral on the all-important question in this video. Do women face discrimination? To answer that, we'll need some better evidence.
Part 2. Yes, women face discrimination.
Peterson regularly asserts that women don't face too much discrimination in modern Western societies.
Do you have a theory with regards to how we do expand equality without going to such extreme?
I think we're doing a good job of that right now. Fairly. We could get to a point where people were treated fairly or more fairly. I mean, people are treated pretty fairly in Western culture already.
As we've seen, one major piece of evidence he cites to
I hate like extra praise of Western culture or whatnot. There's an element of right wing terminology and a lot of the just little hints of the white nationalism that's just been conditioned into most people in a lot of parts of America and Europe for a long time. Too long.
Support this, multivariate analysis of the gender pay gap is largely irrelevant. But there are a wide range of innovative studies which give researchers more control over the environment to try and disentangle discrimination from other causes. And there are quite a few ways that gender discrimination can drive outcomes like the gender pay gap. First, women tend to be discouraged from working in the first place and encouraged to engage in unpaid care or housework.
Yeah, that's true.
Second, women who do work are filtered into occupations which have lower pay, again often occupations that revolve around care. Third.
So, I feel like point two, women who are filtered into occupations which have lower pay, is kind of true. I mean, it's true, but it's true as well as the fact that when women go into work, like I mentioned before, if women go into work, chances are that occupations pay will lower. I know there's been examples of this. This is my problem. I'm going off of memory. I don't know enough to cite sources currently, so anything I say, take with a grain of salt. This person has done way more research than me in this video.
Even within a given occupation, women are subject to different expectations than men, and they're generally at a disadvantage for getting a raise or a promotion. What unites these three observations is that women are generally pushed more towards caring roles.
Let's make some cookies for the boys.
Outside of employment, this can mean child or adult care. Inside employment, it can mean teaching, nursing, and social work. This graph shows the hours per day spent in unpaid care work for women and men in the USA over time. They are both indexed relative to the average, so in 2019, women spent 32% more time in care work than average, while men spent 33% less time in care work. This disparity will only have increased during the pandemic. Remember that last section when I said that the gender pay gap is actually 40% if you don't condition unemployment at all? No, me neither. But the common response to this would be that if women work less, they should naturally get paid less. Except that women...
Well, I mean, I did remember that, actually. Kind of. Maybe. Now I'm questioning myself.
Do a lot more unpaid labour, largely inside the home, which is not remunerated by the market. Ignoring this requires a judgment that this work is not socially useful enough to warrant funding, a judgment that is rarely made explicit.
I need to relax, okay? I was working all day. And you don't think taking care of our chick is work?
But in my expert opinion, making sure children and partners don't starve is good for humanity and for the economy. Helen Lewis did bring this up in Peterson's GQ interview, but his response was far from convincing.
You know, I'm not a fan of the idea that the most fundamental orientation that a person is likely to have in their life is career. I don't believe that's true for most people. I certainly don't believe it's true for most women. And I think the evidence supports that claim quite straightforwardly. So,
However, it is the only thing you get paid for under capitalism. Right?
man alive.
But that's
How can you say something like that? It's so cliched.
Well,
It's so painful to hear that.
Maybe cliche, but it nonetheless is true, right?
Well,
Women do
it's
more,
not
much
capitalism.
more.
Well, for God's sake.
It is.
No, it isn't. You have to invest into a child for 18 years before they have any economic utility. It's a consequence of delayed economic utility. We don't know how to monetize it. It's not a consequence of
No, it definitely is a consequence of capitalism. Yeah, that has to do with the structure of our economy is set up. Has historically been set up to assume that there's an amount of unpaid labor.
Capitalism is a consequence of the fact that human beings have an 18-year dependency. How do you monetize that? Even in principle, we don't know.
It's weird to say something isn't about capitalism and then talk about monetization, an obviously capitalist concept. But all Peterson is realizing is why humans need to share and cooperate, with an eye to reciprocity over time. If we reward raising children and other care work, then it will result in better outcomes for everyone in the long run, and there is a well-known way to do it in modern societies. It's called the welfare state. This will all come up again when we discuss Scandinavia. The Biden administration has actually recognized all of this and made moves to address the gender pay gap. The arguments made echo some of the points I've made in this video. They aim to reduce occupational segregation, a key driver of the gender pay gap, which we've already detailed. The gender pay gap has narrowed during the coronavirus pandemic, but this has been called an artificial narrowing, which has only occurred because women have dropped out of the workforce altogether. This is exactly the point about different caring responsibilities that I've made. If you weren't aware of this, as I wasn't, it may be because your information is coming mostly from non-centrist news sources. I found this story on Ground News, a platform which tries to give you a balanced view of what people from across the political spectrum are seeing. It's no secret that our information sources have become highly filtered on the internet, and Ground News is the most straightforward way I've seen to combat this bias. I found Ground News really helpful, and now I check it almost every day. The Biden administration's policies to close the gender pay gap are surely not perfect, and I'm not trying to say that they are. But knowing that they recognize key points made in the literature about the gender pay gap, certainly more so than Jordan Peterson does, is encouraging, and I'm glad that steps are being taken. I likely wouldn't have known about this just from consulting left or even right-wing news sources, because Ground News shows you that 2/3 of coverage of this story was from the center. You can sign up for Ground News for free by clicking in the link in the description, or you can subscribe for full access to their news analysis features and to support a small independent company working to help readers navigate a complex media landscape. Sponsors like this will help me to keep the channel going as I plan to start doing this full-time pretty soon. Now I'd like to draw your attention to a clip from Peterson's buddy Ben Shapiro, refuting the idea that attitudes instilled in children drive job choices later in life.
I don't know. There are a lot of people saying to a 7th grade girl who's good at math, you need to stop that and go read some poetry.
Something tells me that has happened.
What a great argument, Ben, saying that you don't think something is happening. Let me try. I don't think Ben Shapiro has looked at any of the studies on gender attitudes towards children ever. I win. Except I actually have evidence for my assertions. There are a large number of studies on influences in early childhood and at school. Parents of daughters think their child has to work harder than parents of sons despite equal ability. Exposure to same-sex role models increases girls' intentions and motivation to pursue STEM careers. Boys and girls initially like STEM the same, but there is a relative drop for girls over the term due to peer influences. Teachers rate the reading ability of boys and maths ability of girls to be less likely to be above average, despite the same scores. So yes, Ben, girls are actually encouraged to read poems instead of doing maths by teachers, peer influences, and a lack of role models.
Yeah, once again, this person does seem to understand this bit better than me.
Astronaut. Women can't be astronauts. Why not? They distract the men astronauts so they wouldn't keep their minds on the road.
A study in the USA looked at how early exposure to these kinds of gender attitudes feeds into occupational choices in adulthood. Different states score differently on attitudes towards gender roles. As this map shows, the states coloured in blue tend to have more traditional views, whereas red states tend to have more progressive or egalitarian views. Why didn't they do the colours the other way around? It's so confusing. The paper shows that women born in more progressive states, in red, are less likely to end up in care occupations. Men born in more progressive states are more likely to end up in care occupations. In other words, being exposed to a climate of progressive gender attitudes earlier in life reduces the gender gap in occupation choice, and therefore the gender pay gap. In addition, both women and men born in more progressive states are more likely to end up employed, full stop, and the effect is bigger for women. This may further reduce the gender pay gap. These early childhood influences are far from the whole picture. There's also outright discrimination in hiring. Some of the tightest studies in this area, and in my opinion the tightest quantitative studies done in the social sciences, are those which send out fake job applications which differ only in the gender of the applicants. Everything else from their employment history to their education is held constant. One of the good things about these studies is that since the applicants are constructed as identical, there are no average differences between the two groups in terms of what employers can observe. One study found that female students who wanted to continue study and apply to manage a laboratory were less likely to be hired than men and were offered a lower salary if they were hired. This graph shows the average salary offered to men, in dark grey, as being a good few thousand higher than that offered to women. This graph shows that men were also judged to be more competent, more hireable, and given more mentoring by the faculty. David Newmark's review of these types of studies found evidence for discrimination by gender. Some of these studies are genuine field experiments where the job applications are sent out to real employers and women get fewer calls back. Others are hypothetical, which allows for more detail about the candidates through detailed stories told to employers. These help to eliminate any possible confounding but unobserved variables like personality, though of course the studies may suffer from not being real employment decisions. All of these studies come to the same conclusion. Women are discriminated against in male-dominated jobs. These jobs also tend to be higher paid and higher status than female-dominated jobs, doctors, lawyers, scientists, financiers, etc. However, and this is an important point, it's not the case that women are discriminated against in every job. Unlike discrimination against ethnic minorities, where minority groups just have a lower chance of getting any job, patterns of gender discrimination reinforce traditional gender roles. If you're male, and my analytics suggest you may well be, you've probably had the frustrating experience of applying to hospitality or secretarial roles as a teenager and being rejected, only to see women who also have no experience be accepted.
You're right at the place, don't you? If she gets the job, so if he gets it, you're both equal. Lovely. That looks nice. Lovely blue eyes. Okay, big smile. That's lovely. Lovely. Just give that a minute. Have a look at that. Do you want to use that? Good.
But while the hiring practices in hospitality are undoubtedly unfair to teenage boys, and also generally to people not considered attractive, it doesn't change the fact that on net, men tend to get filtered into high-paying.
Yeah, there's also some discrimination with LGBTQ people, with regards to teaching jobs, and what's the other one? What's the other one? Thinking of. Oh, the one where you care for children. Where you're paid to care for children.
In high-status jobs, while women get filtered into low-paying, low-status jobs.
It's assumed that men are all creeps when dealing with children.
Peterson has acknowledged, average differences between men and women are pretty small, only apply to some personality traits and don't apply to ability at all.
The average IQ for a woman and the average IQ for a man is identical. There is some debate about the flatness of the distribution, which is something that James Moore pointed out, for example, in his memo, but there's no difference at all in general cognitive ability. There's no difference to speak of in conscientiousness. Women are a bit more orderly than men, and men are a little bit more industrious than women, but the difference isn't big.
You just can't explain the large biases displayed towards men and women across such a wide variety of roles by appealing to these small average differences. Peterson also mentions the extremes of these traits.
Men and women are broadly similar with regards to aggression, although men tilt a little bit more towards aggression. So that if you pick a random person out of the population, male and female, and you guess that the male was more aggressive, you'd be right 60% of the time. But if you take the 1 in 100 most aggressive people, they're all male, and that's why the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male.
But that's not what we're talking about here, as many of these are just normal jobs and we still observe big disparities. We're not talking about the extremes when we send CVs to restaurants or administration jobs. Here I want to comment on something related I've seen from Peterson and others. That radical feminists or whatever don't think about the lower quality jobs predominantly done by men.
And that's why the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that? Just out of curiosity? What about bricklayers? They're 99% male.
Yes. Gender equality, for me at least, does mean that women will do more jobs such as construction, firefighting, and manual labor.
Yeah, and there are plenty of women who want those jobs, but yeah.
Class equality, of course, means that the jobs themselves will improve substantially and the burden be shared more equally, but that's another issue. And don't even get me started on prisons. Anyway, so far we've looked at how women are more likely to do unpaid care work and are also more likely to work in more caring but lower paid occupations. What remains is to look at how men and women are treated in similar jobs. One of the most interesting findings is that women are more likely to be asked to engage in less promotable tasks. Men will make the presentation, lead the team, attend the conference in Vienna, all the things that will get noticed and get them promoted. Women will be expected to take minutes, make tea, make sure the team is ticking along behind the scenes, all the things that no one notices and which get taken for granted. You know, care.
Ugh, God damn it, I don't get paid enough for this shit.
I can smell it. What? How did we fall asleep during interdimensional cable?
What the hell, Summer?
Summer, you dumb
How long
bitch.
were we out?
Why'd you
Dumb
interdimensional
bitch?
cable
How
during
many
this summer, you
TV
stupid
shows
bitch?
commercials
Why'd you let us fall
during
asleep?
the
Dumb
summer?
bitch.
This study found that in a US university, women were more likely than men to volunteer to be on a committee. This committee was not regarded as a role which would further your career, yet women disproportionately populate such committees. Women account for over a third of members, despite being only a quarter of academics at the university. Across 5 different experiments, women were found to be more likely to cooperate than men, making a move which helped the group at their individual expense. This was not explained by differences in preferences such as greater altruism among women. It was not explained by the agreeableness trait often mentioned by Peterson. A separate study found that women were actively punished via lower performance evaluations for not displaying this kind of altruistic behavior, whereas men were not. One final thing that women have to deal with much more than men is sexual harassment. A study in Sweden found that around 12% of women reported experiencing sexual harassment in their workplaces in the past year.
Too many. Too much sexual harassment. I know this is gonna be a shock, but
This
yeah.
can take the form of unwanted sexual attention or derogatory comments about your gender. The corresponding figure for men is around 4%, 3 times lower. Most importantly, and in line with the theme of men and women ending up in different occupations, women are more likely to experience sexual harassment in higher paid, male-dominated workplaces. This confusing looking but actually quite simple graph shows the share of people who were sexually harassed in the past year on the y-axis. It has the share of men in the workplace on the x-axis.
So share sexually harassed in the last 12 months. Goes up, share of men in workplace. Oh, okay, so is that the percentage of men in the workplace? So more men in a place, the more sexual harassment in the workplace. 0.25. I don't know what's this.
Data points for female workers are clear circles, while those for male workers are black triangles. You can see by the line fitted along the circles that sexual harassment is more likely for women the more men are in the workplace. The line fitted along the triangle shows the opposite. Sexual harassment is less likely for men the more men there are in the workplace.
Oh. Oh, okay. Oh. Okay, that actually makes more sense.
In fact, with a high enough proportion of women, or low enough proportion of men are actually more likely to be harassed than women. Sexual harassment can affect anyone, but it disproportionately affects women. The study also shows that women who have experienced sexual harassment are more likely to leave the high-paying, male-dominated occupations to go to low-paying, female-dominated occupations. This is a huge source of discrimination, driving women away from higher-paying occupations. If you believe the calculations in the study, sexual harassment alone explains 10% of the gender wage gap.
People are treated pretty fairly in Western culture already.
No. If I had to summarize the admittedly vast array of evidence we
Are treated pretty unfairly all across the world. It's a world problem.
just looked at, and I suppose I do have to summarize it because I'm the one making the video, I would say that women and men are continually exposed to norms and outright discrimination which push them into different occupations and roles in society. Women tend to be encouraged to do care work, both paid and unpaid, while men will tend to be discouraged from these roles and encouraged into better paid ones. Women are less likely to work and therefore earn money in the first place, partly due to a strong expectation that they will perform unpaid labor in the household. Women face a lower likelihood of getting hired in high-paying, high-status jobs. If they get these jobs, they will still not be treated equally, as they are expected to help others and the group over themselves, whereas men are not. In many cases, women will experience outright harassment, which will just cause them to give up on being in male-dominated spaces. These dynamics probably affect us all negatively, men and women alike, because they inhibit.
And I think this is. I know I'm obsessed with esports, especially League of Legends. So like I totally. I mean that's also true for esports, obviously.
Human flourishing and freedom, but the brunt of it falls on women, who have less access to resources, less recognition, and have to endure discrimination and harassment of various kinds. When he's not being wrong about multivariate analysis of the gender pay gap, or getting upset about pictures of attractive women, Jordan Peterson.
I forgot about that tweet. Let me go back to that.
Brunt of it falls on women, who have less access to resources, less recognition, and have to endure discrimination and harassment of various kinds. When he's not being wrong about multivariate analysis of the gender pay gap, or getting upset about pictures.
Wow, sorry, not beautiful. No amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that. What is this authoritarian tolerance? That seems like a bit of a contrary point of view. Authoritarianism is based inherently on a class hierarchy, a class hierarchy. So you have people on the top and you have people on the bottom. If you're talking about tolerance, tolerance is about equality. I'm not sure if you can have authoritarian tolerance. I think those two frameworks are inherently oppositional.
Of attractive women, Jordan Peterson likes to reference Scandinavia as an example of how pursuing gender equality leads to magnified differences between men and women.
The biggest differences between men and women in the world in terms of temperament and interest are in Scandinavia, and they've maximized as a consequence of their egalitarian policies. What do you mean by that? It means that the more egalitarian your state, the bigger the personality differences between men and women. I know everyone's shocked when they hear this. This isn't shocking news. People have known this in the scientific community for at least 25 years, and it's been replicated in the last month 3 times in 3 separate samples, including in Science, which is the world's greatest scientific magazine by a large margin. And it isn't a small effect, it's a huge effect.
In an article written on the topic, he references a few studies to support his conclusion. So, let's take a look at these, shall we? We'll start with the most famous study, the gender equality paradox, which has over 600 citations. Alright, so let's take a look at this gender equality paper. Oh, what's this? Corrigendum.
Corrigendum. Huh.
I don't know what that word means, to be honest. Nobody knows what that word means. Let's scroll past this. Let's get to the actual paper. As Peterson claimed, this paper finds that gender equality is correlated with a lower propensity for women to pursue careers in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. According to the paper, women are perfectly capable of pursuing STEM careers, as judged by school test scores, but they don't want to. The number of women in STEM is much lower than the number of women who could be successful in STEM. The introduction of the paper closely follows Peterson's interpretation.
We found that countries with high levels of gender equality have some of the largest STEM gaps in secondary and tertiary education. We call this the educational gender equality paradox. For example, Finland excels in gender equality. Its adolescent girls outperform boys in science literacy, and it ranks second in European educational performance. With these high levels of educational performance and overall gender equality, Finland is poised to close the STEM gender gap. Yet, paradoxically, Finland has one of the world's largest gender gaps in college degrees in STEM fields, and Norway and Sweden, also leading in gender equality rankings, are not far behind.
Peterson is representing the study accurately. But what bothers me is that the paper consists mostly of a bunch of correlations across countries. The main correlation is here. On the x-axis, we have female participation in STEM, while on the y-axis, we have the Global Gender Gap Index, or GGGI, a measure of gender equality.
Okay, so that's not something you can reasonably draw a line through. That actually makes it seem like those aren't really super connected.
Each red dot is a country, and the downward-sloping blue line is the negative correlation between the two measures. The more women in STEM, the worse the state of gender equality. I want to communicate something to you. Cross-country correlations are among the weakest of statistical findings out there. First, there's the issue of small sample size. There are only 62 countries on this graph. With such a small sample size, adding another 20 countries, which fell in the top right corner, could eliminate the correlation entirely. The second issue is that there are huge differences between countries based on their culture, economies, and history that are left out of such simple comparisons. These are confounding variables of the type we discussed earlier in the context of the gender pay gap. Oftentimes you will find that controlling for obvious confounders
And also, that's not... Well, I don't know enough about the Global Gender Gap Index.
like population, inequality, or GDP, eliminates cross-country correlations entirely. Thirdly, correlation doesn't imply causation.
Okay, thanks.
Wait, did you know that there's a direct correlation between the decline of spirograph and the rise in gang activity? Think about it.
I will.
No, you won't.
You can get much stronger correlations between female participation in STEM and irrelevant measures, like bachelor's degrees awarded to women in STEM versus online revenue on Black Friday, an extremely tight correlation, or PhDs awarded to women in science and engineering versus money spent on admissions to spectator sports. But don't believe me on this, just listen to Jordan Peterson. After all, another way of describing a correlation is univariate analysis.
If you're a social scientist, worth your salt. You never do a univariate analysis.
Finally, there's the issue of measures. Countries measure things like what counts as STEM participation very differently, so you might be comparing apples and oranges. Some countries consider health services as part of STEM, while others consider them separate. Women are overrepresented in health, so this may skew the results. If you don't have a consistent way of categorizing STEM versus not STEM across countries, your results are simply unreliable. I could spend a whole video on how indexes like the Global Gender Gap Index can be poor for making broad inferences of the type made by Peterson. The GGGI summarizes several measures in a country: economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, political empowerment. Because these indexes aggregate over so many different things, a change in the GGGI doesn't tell us what actually happened and may mask conflicting forces within a country. To take an extreme example, women could get the vote but simultaneously get banned from employment in certain industries, and the index might not change much overall. The GGGI also misses important things like cultural expectations placed on women. As one article put it,
while it may be good at identifying the countries where a woman can win an election, it's bad at identifying the ones where she'll be welcome in a physics department.
Sarah Richardson and her colleagues actually correlated a different index of gender equality with the percentage of STEM degrees awarded to women, and found no correlation whatsoever. Ah, that's curious. Maybe it has something to do with that corrigendum business. Alright, so let's just figure out what this word means. Corrigendum. Corrigendum. A thing to be corrected. Typically an error in a printed book.
What?
Oh. Well, it turns out that the original gender equality paradox study came under some sustained criticism from Richardson and others. This resulted in a debate published in the journal which included this graph, as well as a correction by the original authors. Stoic and Geary said they'd used one measure of STEM participation, but they'd actually used another, so they had to clarify that as well as a few other things. I don't want to mislead you here. A corrigendum is not the same thing as a retraction. It just means that the original paper had poor explanations of some contestable choices. These have since been clarified, if not necessarily justified. But this all speaks to the question of how robust the finding is, and what we can infer from it. Now I could just stop here. Small sample sizes, omitted variables, contestable measures, and correlation doesn't equal causation are enough to go on. But I want to hammer home exactly how unjustified Peterson is in the inferences he draws from this paper, because it's such a widely cited finding, and it's interesting to unpack exactly how it could be wrong. For this, I'm going to ignore most of the issues I've just raised and assume that the key correlation we're seeing in this graph is in fact there. It still doesn't prove anything. There's an issue in statistics known as the ecological fallacy. This states that we can't draw inferences about individuals from results which are at a higher level of aggregation. A classic example is a researcher who saw that suicide rates in Protestant counties in the USA were higher than those in Catholic counties, and concluded that Protestantism was associated with suicide. But it turned out that when you looked at individuals, the people dying by suicide in the Protestant counties were not actually the Protestants themselves. Just because there was a higher average suicide rate in combination with a higher number of Protestants, it doesn't mean one was driving the other. Another example is smoking and life expectancy. When you correlate the two across countries, you find that more smoking is associated with higher life expectancy. But we know that smoking is bad for an individual's health. In this case, there seems to be a confounding variable of GDP, since this is associated both with higher life expectancy and the growth of consumer goods, including cigarettes. The ecological fallacy is just a detailed illustration of why correlation doesn't imply causation, specific to correlations made at the level of a group, counties, countries, whatever. Associating gender equality with lower STEM participation by women across countries does not guarantee that the two are associated at the level of individual women and men. Let's illustrate this with a simple example. Say there are two countries, country A and country B. Each country has only two industries, tech and law. Tech has a gender pay gap, with women being paid £20,000 a year, while men are paid £30,000 a year. Law has no discrimination and no gender pay gap. Men and women are both paid £30,000 a year. Let's say that country A has 20 out of every 100 women in tech and 80 out of every 100 women in law. It has 50 out of 100 men in tech and the same in law. Country B has 40 in 100 women in tech and 60 in 100 women in law. It again has 50-50 men in tech versus law. In country A, there is discrimination in hiring against women in tech fields, just as we saw with the previous studies, which is why fewer women go into tech. Country B also has discrimination against women in tech, but less so, so more women go into it. If you measure the gender pay gap in each country, you will find that it is higher in country B. Why? Because in country B, more women are in unequal tech versus equal law. But this is precisely because women face less discrimination in hiring. The pay gap measure of gender equality is higher in country A simply because so many of its female populace are in law, having been driven out of tech via discrimination. This
Wow. That is a major problem.
example features higher gender equality by one measure, the gender pay gap, going hand in hand with more severe gender discrimination by another measure, reluctance to hire women. It speaks again to the multifaceted nature of gender discrimination and why crude correlations are uninformative. I'm not saying this example is realistic. I'm trying to establish one thing. It's extremely easy to generate a counterexample that produces the gender equality paradox in aggregate, despite still featuring discrimination against women. I did it in half an hour using Microsoft Excel, and I'm a fucking idiot. One way of putting the ecological fallacy is that you can't infer from a high level of analysis to a low level of analysis. You can't go from country level to state level, you can't go from state level to county level, and you can't go from county level to individual level. And you certainly can't go from country level to individual level. That's...
No, this is actually pretty interesting in terms of the breakdown.
Three whole steps at once. To overcome the ecological fallacy in our previous examples, we need data showing that individual Protestants aren't actually more likely to fall victim to suicide, or data showing that individuals who smoke more have a lower life expectancy. Yet the authors of the gender equality paper interpret their paradox as a story about individuals without the relevant data.
Life satisfaction is higher in gender equal countries, and we think that when life satisfaction is higher and when people feel more secure in a society, they feel they can do what they really like. They are less driven by economic interests.
They do an additional test in this section. They use a measure of life satisfaction to mediate the negative correlation between gender equality and STEM participation. The idea is that as gender equality increases, there are better prospects for a satisfactory life, and women are free to pursue other paths than STEM. In less gender equal countries, they may be forced to pursue STEM for economic security, despite not truly wanting to, and their life satisfaction may be lower because of this. Therefore, life satisfaction is an intermediary step between gender equality and less STEM participation. Intermediary, mediation, you get it. They find that life satisfaction does mediate the relationship, but only partially, and admit that this part of their analysis is limited, because there may be other confounding factors. Reminder that this is still done at the level of countries, not individuals, and is unable to show causality. Anyway, let's put all of our previous critiques to one side and suppose that the observed negative correlation between gender equality and female STEM participation is driven by behavior at the individual level. In other words, there's no ecological fallacy. It's still shockingly easy to put together an explanation for this association that features gender stereotypes and discrimination against women. Consider this simple explanation. Many rich countries have pursued equality in pay and expanded welfare, but eliminated neither discrimination against women nor traditional gender roles. Observed differences in personality and preferences are shaped by these factors, and the expansion of resources into things like childcare actually enables women to fulfill traditional gender roles more easily, as the welfare expansion has not made them go away. This is actually in line with historical accounts of welfare in Scandinavian countries, but we'll get to those later. A study in 2020 looked at the gender equality paradox again.
The world is complicated. I think that the ultimate thing I'm learning from here is that you can't use any study unless it does all the variables, because that's true with anything, but like there are a lot of factors when it comes to gender pay gap.
They measured the intentions of boys versus girls to pursue careers in areas such as maths, physics, and computer science, the main subjects which drive a gender difference in STEM.
Do it, Lisa. You'll be greater than or equal to boys.
Even though you're only 8, your possibilities are infinite.
27!
They found the gender equality paradox holds up by correlating children's career intentions with various measures, including the Global Gender Gap Index from the Stowe and Geary paper. But they also measured gender stereotypes by looking at boys and girls' self-reported belief in their ability to do maths. Children were asked how strongly they agreed with the following two statements.
Doing well in math is completely up to me. My parents believe that math is important for my career.
These are good measures because they don't actually mention gender, so there's less chance of the children answering what they think they should answer. A question like, do you think that math is more for boys than for girls, is going to be extremely prone to this so-called social desirability bias, and the fact that they didn't use it is one reason I like this paper. It turns out that boys are more likely to think that doing well in maths is up to them than girls are. Boys are also more likely to think that their parents believe maths is important for their career. If you control for these measures, the association between the GGGI and intention to pursue a career in math-related subjects disappears entirely. In other words, the gender equality paradox in this paper is completely mediated by boys' and girls' beliefs surrounding maths. The authors also run similar tests using...
That also makes sense in terms of different countries have different attitudes towards math and gender.
Individual level data and find similar results. It's extremely easy to generate the gender equality paradox. Is this paper the final word? Of course it isn't. I have criticisms of it myself. For instance, why they used only intentions to study STEM rather than a harder concrete measure. Now, if you're one of the many people who will make lazy response videos to this, you might be saying, but these aren't definitely stereotypes. Maybe boys and girls just say different things because they're wired differently. And that may be true. It could be that boys' belief in themselves somehow stems from biology. You know, the famous belief gene. A genetic explanation seems less likely for their second-hand beliefs about their parents' beliefs, but you could make an argument, the belief squared gene. My point is how difficult it is to disentangle these explanations.
I am a big fan of the belief squared gene. It's the most complicated, lesser-known gene out there.
Stereotypes and innate differences can manifest in the exact same way, so the gender equality paradox is hardly a slam dunk in favor of the latter. Yet Peterson attaches to the gender paradox correlation an interpretation that is simply unwarranted and in which he is far too confident.
I know the literature, and it says exactly what I said it says. And as I said as well, it's been replicated 3 times in the last month.
Yeah, but I mean that is how some people get convinced by people like Jordan Peterson, is just due to the confidence in which they're citing the one study they found, which has a lot of problems.
The London Times came out 3 weeks ago and said that the finding that gender differences maximize as egalitarian policies are developed is now one of the most solidly grounded findings ever produced by social scientists.
There are some other studies Peterson has referenced in support of his argument, but many of them seem to rely on cross-country data. One paper averaged sex differences in personality by country and found they were larger for the more gender-equal countries. The main result is a positive correlation between sex differences in personality and the Gender Equality Index, and there are only 22 goddamn observations. This is not science.
If you're a social scientist, worth your salt. You never do a univariate analysis.
Okay, we get it. And don't tell me they use multivariate analysis because the word appears in the paper. That refers to the personality index they created rather than the statistical analysis that they use it for. There are still many confounders omitted from the analysis. And don't tell me they have thousands of observations on personality because they average them at the country level, which is exactly when the ecological fallacy rears its ugly head. To improve on it, they'd have to do some more sophisticated analysis using individual level data for both variables. And there is one more convincing paper in the sources cited by Peterson that does exactly this. This paper again looks at cross-country differences in preferences. It finds again that in more gender-equal countries, as measured by the GGGI and other indexes, there are larger gender differences in things like altruism, trust, risk-taking, and so on. The paper does 2 things which distinguish it from the others. Firstly, it doesn't only look at correlations, it also runs some regressions which control for GDP, and the finding stands. Secondly, it uses individual level data too, showing that preference differences are higher for individual women with higher incomes. This is the equivalent of looking at health outcomes for individual smokers instead of correlating it with life expectancy across countries. In other words, this paper avoids the ecological fallacy. I'm kind of confused as to why the authors buried the lead by putting these results, the only individual level findings, in the supplementary materials instead of the main paper. This is the one convincing piece of evidence in the study cited by Peterson, but it is still only one study, hardly enough for his expressed degree of certainty about the gender equality paradox. After all, the other study we just saw used individual level data to test the impact of stereotypes on STEM participation and found they played a role. Science and statistics are difficult and often contradictory, but even the authors of the present study make it clear that their results do not rule out environmental influences on preferences.
Our findings do not rule out an influence of gender-specific roles that drive gender differences in preferences. They also do not preclude the role of the biological or evolutionary determinants of gender differences. Our results highlight, however, that theories not attributing a significant role to the social environment are incomplete.
To translate into English, they're saying that there is a lot still up in the air in the nature-nurture debate about gender roles. This simply isn't.
Now, there could be an element of there is an element of nurturing on some level associated with hormones, and that might be a factor, but it's not a major it's not a major enough factor to justify this level of difference, and it definitely doesn't justify the pay gap.
And settled, and we're not going to do so here. What we are instead aiming to establish, to remind you, is whether discrimination is a major factor driving economic outcomes for women. At best, the gender equality paradox does not sway us one way or another, since it can be shown to be consistent with gender discrimination and stereotypes, as well as with biological differences between men and women. One article offered 7 potential suggestions for the gender equality paradox, which were consistent with gender roles and women facing discrimination. It's extremely easy to generate the gender equality paradox. So, what have we learned? Is it okay to infer causation from cross-country correlations?
Could I marry my own son? No. Possibly not? Correct. Or is it?
As with the gender pay gap, the analysis Peterson relies on is not sufficient to prove his point. The finding has many flaws, including a small sample size and confounding variables. It is also prone to the ecological fallacy, inferring conclusions about individuals from an aggregate level of analysis. Above all, it simply does not contradict a story where women are driven out of STEM due to discrimination. So let's move away from these kinds of studies. We've already seen quantitatively rigorous evidence on how women face discrimination in Western economies, but each country has a unique history, and if we're making these cross-country comparisons, it's informative to delve into how gender discrimination has evolved over time. This can shed some light on the more detailed historical context underpinning the individual data points. One of the frustrating things about Peterson's interpretation of this data is how loose he is with some of the key ideas. He repeatedly refers to countries pursuing gender egalitarianism, but rarely defines exactly what this means.
And that's a consequence of the free choice of men and women in the societies that have gone farther than any other societies to make gender equality the purpose of the law. And what you find is, the more egalitarian the society, the more different the men and women become.
A bit of historical perspective shows how shallow this analysis is, since gender egalitarianism isn't just a dial we turn up and down. Sexism and discrimination are complex creatures. Welfare states in Scandinavian countries have provided economic security for women while retaining the notion of gender differences. Throughout the 20th century, women were considered equal but different and expected to act as housewives raising children. Concrete policy choices reinforce these stereotypical roles, as did prevailing narratives about men and women in society. The book, Gender Equality and Welfare Politics in Scandinavia, spells this out clearly.
The ambition of gender equality has been more explicitly expressed and applied in the Scandinavian countries than in other countries of Europe. But gender equality in the early 20th century, to a great extent, meant equality based on gender difference. The book raises the question whether the hallmark of the Scandinavian welfare model is a special combination of gender equality and gender differentiation. It stresses the importance of viewing the concept of equality in its historical context and investigates the changing meaning of equality based on sameness and/or gender difference. What is striking in the marriage reform process of the Nordic countries is the very strong emphasis on equality in motivations and discussions. But it is important to notice that equality meant something else at the time than it does today. From the beginning of the century, a norm saying that married women's primary duty was to take care of the home and the children, while husbands supported the family through their work, received increased support in society. When equality was claimed in the context of marriage reform, it was, openly or not, usually based on the assumption of this kind of gender division of labour. From this point of departure, equality meant that work and care within the family, or, to be more precise, within what was counted as normal families, was valued as different from, but as important as, work outside.
The Scandinavian countries are also different from one another, so we have to be careful when making generalizations. The differences between them actually further support the point I'm making, that economic equality for women often meant larger differences in gender roles. Denmark has a long history of men serving as the head of the household, including privileging men in their ownership of property and their tax responsibilities. Sweden originally had a similar system, but moved much more quickly to abolish it, while Norway recognized women's economic rights even earlier. However, and here's the crucial point, Norway has always had more of a focus on economic rights for women as mothers. The Norwegians only introduced equal parental responsibility for children in the late 20th century, with policies like men's custody rights and paternity leave. Other Nordic countries, and even the UK, introduced these policies in the early 20th century, decades before Norway. Norway's greater social emphasis on women's traditional role as mothers, homemakers, and caregivers actually went hand in hand with its greater recognition of their economic rights. This could produce the so-called gender equality paradox even within the Scandinavian countries. Norway may be higher on gender equality but lower on female STEM participation because women have been more closely linked with their traditional role as mothers, including being supported for it economically. It's extremely easy to generate the gender equality paradox. Now, this gender equality book was probably written by postmodern neo-Marxists. Couldn't resist. Peterson and his ilk seem to enjoy making a big deal out of saying, even left-wing people agree with me. His blog post reads that a paper confirming the gender equality paradox was published in Science by researchers at Berkeley, hardly a hotbed of conservatism and patriarchy. So let me give the obverse a go. The right libertarian website CapX has an article by Nima Sanandaji which argues basically the same thing as gender equality and welfare politics in Scandinavia. Nordic welfare states have promoted gender divisions. Sanandaji cites a study on the glass ceiling in Sweden. The study identifies a frozen pipeline, a lack of women who are going into well-paid professions and managerial roles. One reason, again, is that relatively generous childcare policies reduce the attractiveness of going into and staying in full-time employment for many women. In the USA, by comparison, going into paid work commands a much higher salary than child benefits, which has drawn women into the workforce and higher-paying positions just to access resources. Claudia Goldin's study in the USA found that educational differences were no longer a key driver of the gender pay gap. As she says,
as women have increased their productivity-enhancing characteristics, and as they look more like men, the human capital part of the wage difference has been squeezed out.
This is so in the USA, but not in Sweden. Huge differences in education choices help to explain Swedish gender segregation. Managers of manufacturing firms in Sweden are recruited from fields like engineering. But for every one female graduate in civil engineering in Sweden, there are 11 men. The Swedish system results in fewer women in higher ranked positions because so many women are not full-time workers with the appropriate educational backgrounds, and this has been driven by policy choices. According to Sanandaji, this conclusion can be generalized.
The rise of the Nordic welfare states was, however, a double-edged sword. It encouraged women to join the workforce, but it also created barriers to women's professional progress. The tax and benefit model, as well as publicly monopolized services, were constructed for typical families of full-time working men and part-time working women. With the rise of the welfare system, women-dominated services such as education, health, and
Can I just say that culture, sexism, and so much stuff is so interwoven into every aspect of society that even if you try to address one, you've oftentimes only scratched the surface.
Elderly care were made parts of public monopolies. A wage-setting system, according to which incomes rose very slowly, with little connection to individual performance, was introduced by the state in these women-dominated parts of the economy. By introducing public monopolies in the parts of the economy where women work, but not in those in which men work, the Nordic welfare model did the opposite of increasing women's choice. The system limited choice and opportunity for career advancement in predominantly women-occupied places of work.
The difference is that Sanandaji has a generally anti-welfare state outlook and hopes to equalize opportunities through the free market. But ultimately, we have the same basic analysis. So there you go. A right-winger agrees with me. Do with that what you will. As one final piece of evidence, Sweden is actually second only to the USA among Western countries in cases of sexual harassment against women. In summary, gender roles are alive and well in Scandinavia, as is discrimination based on gender. In fact, the very same policies which have increased equality on some measures have reinforced gender differences on others. But lest this video become too scando-centric, let's turn to some other examples, and specifically the T in STEM. Mar Hicks has detailed how the British tech industry used to be dominated by women. At the time, working with computers was seen as a low-status role, despite the fact that it was technically demanding. Women were therefore employed in these roles, but not treated especially well.
Even when electromechanical and then electronic computers came in, women continued to do computing work. They programmed, operated, troubleshooted, tested that the majority of women working in government did not gain equal pay.
As it became clear that computers were going to be kind of a big deal, it became increasingly difficult to deprive women of equal pay, positions, and respect. The solution that my wonderful country settled on was, of course, to improve the lot of these women working in tech, and thus bring them to parity with men, helping solve both gender equality and create a world-leading tech industry in one fell swoop. Just kidding. They decided to exclude women completely from the industry and ended up destroying it in the process.
Yeah, Yeah, that happened in America too.
However, the low value assigned to computing work was starting to change. Not because
and had a lot of trouble attracting men to the role because of its association with femininity and its lack of potential career progression.
Women are Dirty.
The exclusion of women and the unwillingness of men to do the work culminated in the UK government investing in centralised mainframe technologies to reduce the amount of labour needed to run computers at all. Unfortunately, this technology was doomed, and investing in it killed off the already dying UK tech industry. Men will literally invest in an outdated digital mainframe instead of going to therapy. This kind of historical evidence obviates some of the armchair reasoning you get surrounding the gender pay gap. To bring the video full circle, it's not uncommon to see the following argument about the gender pay gap.
If it really could hire the same people for the same job and get a woman who's just as good at it for 75 cents, it's horseshit, though.
They would hire only women. I must admit, I find this logic rather glib. The gender pay gap is a fact to be explained rather than something which can be dismissed out of hand if it doesn't fit your model of the world. If you have 5 minutes spare and possess some critical faculties, you can easily think of explanations for the gender pay gap that go against Rogan's logic. Hiring lots more women might upset your male employees, especially if the industry is already sexist. If you hire too many women, they may be more likely to band together and demand equal pay. Customers can also be sexist, so perhaps women aren't hired for a client-facing role because customers wouldn't take them as seriously.
Well, you're not the landing party we expected. Would you be able to tell them what's so special about your panties?
Benefits are listed there, but basically they're more sheer, softer, and more like silk to the touch, yet still very strong.
We can pull them down over and over.
Businesses are not perfectly rational and markets aren't perfectly competitive. There can be bias in hiring decisions for a long time. In the mid-20th century, it was simply seen as ridiculous for a woman to be the boss of a man, so it didn't happen. Whatever.
And obviously, disabled people are viewed as not being able to do anything. If have anything that impairs your speech too much, you're viewed as dumb. If it's basically a game of name the difference and find the way it's associated with you not being able to do anything.
For the reason, discrimination against women has been compatible with markets and capitalism for a long time, and we can't hand wave it away with armchair reasoning. These days, it's no secret that tech in the West, at least, is dominated by the USA and specifically Silicon Valley in California. It's also no secret that this industry is dominated by men. Emily Chang has detailed how bad sexism in Silicon Valley really is. They have a 3-to-1 ratio of men to women, whereas banking, an institution well known for its
sexism, to play the game won't, but they don't know all the risks.
Because men disproportionately have an outsized work ethic.
And they work 8 hours a week, and most of them happen to be men. And why is that? Because there are a small number of insane men who will do nothing but
pioneer from the future. Even if your tweets are indistinguishable from those of a 14-year-old with access to Reddit. And you have literally the worst Elden Ring build imaginable. A mage wearing heavy armor with 2 swords. What a genius. There's work long hours, and many low-income people even have multiple jobs or work overtime, but this doesn't translate into high pay. Lowly regarded jobs just don't pay that much, no matter how many hours you work. I could talk about this much more, but this video is focused on gender. And what I'm pointing to here is potentially a reverse causality. Not pay, rank, and prestige, resulting in men choosing the better occupations, but the other way around. Which gender, and more broadly which type of person, works in a role impacts how well it is regarded and remunerated. Whereas coding for long hours in 1960s Britain would have earned you low pay in a dead-end role with no appreciation whatsoever, in the 2020s USA, it makes you a cool, well-off pioneer from the future, even if your tweets are indistinguishable from those of a 14-year-old with access to Reddit. And you have literally the worst Elden Ring build imaginable. A mage wearing heavy armor with 2 swords. What a genius.
Why the 2 swords? Why 2 swords? Like... Equipped load will be lower if fast roll is needed. Really, put it to heavy load for no good reason. Heavy load is only fine if... so I usually do bow. Because I'm standing still anyway, so the only thing that's going to put me into heavy load is equipping a bow, but... Why equip so much stuff that you're not gonna use? Like, you can change your equipment at any time. And death doesn't matter too much, so why equip more? Why not just have a general set of equipment and then good equipment?
Yes. I'm speculating a little bit here with this argument, and I think it's an underexplored question. But the idea that working more hours always translates into money, power, and prestige is blatantly false, given the poorest people in the world work the most hours. All of these historical examples of sexism may have you wondering, is there some promised land where gender stereotypes are less pronounced and women have more of a presence in areas like STEM? Why yes, they're called Look Outside the Fucking West. This graph shows every country where women make up more than 50% of science graduates. Iran, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates top the percentages of women among science graduates, shown in light green, with Iran almost reaching 70%. Mongolia, Greece, Palestine, and Azerbaijan are near the bottom, closer to 50%. Notice that on this graph, only Greece and Italy would be considered Western. Looking at these countries, we can group them into 2 main categories, both of which I'm sure Peterson would love. First, the Muslim world. Second, the former Soviet world. And yes, that's because it was Soviet. These areas of the world have had very different cultural and economic factors, which have resulted in vastly higher representations of women in STEM. Tunisia has a school system which allocates children based on their grades, which organically results in more women in science.
The only female Fields Medal winner, the Fields Medal is like the Nobel Prize of mathematics, was Maryam Mirzakhani, an Iranian-American woman. And I don't think that's a coincidence that she happened to be Iranian. Iran has very good rates of women in science. They don't have the same
stereotypes for some reason as Europe does. So I think really this reflects a historical fact. This long legacy of exclusion is the reason why in Europe we still see this lag. Women catching up. We're still working so hard to change the culture because for so long the culture was so against women.
The former Soviet Union also has a long history of encouraging women into STEM fields, and despite the fall of communism, the norm remains, with the region at rough parity between men and
maternity leave, the state easily organised.
Seem to have failed to understand that many Western countries, even the most progressive ones in Scandinavia, have long histories of enforcing gender roles, both culturally and through policy. Many non-Western countries still have sexism, of course.
That's the conclusion.
This video, I was keen to try and be fair to Peterson, but the best thing I can say about him is that he accurately describes the findings of the studies he references. I've not seen him noticeably misrepresent any studies at all, but what I've seen time and time again is a lack of understanding of what statistical analysis can and can't do, a willingness to draw unwarranted inferences from weak evidence, and a complete omission of the detailed quantitative and historical evidence on discrimination against women. Women face substantial discrimination in Western economies, pushing them towards caring roles that are less well paid than male-dominated areas like STEM. If we somehow eliminated all of this discrimination and the expectations which drive it, would outcomes for men and women be exactly the same? I don't know, maybe not. But unlike Peterson, I'm willing to be clear that I think it would have a substantial effect, accounting for the vast majority of the gender differences in economic outcomes that we see. If I were to give you one takeaway from this video, apart from all the stuff about gender discrimination, it would be that the next time someone aggressively references the scientific and especially quantitative literature on any subject as if it agrees with them, take some time to ask, do the findings really support their interpretation, or are they just hiding behind them? Thank you for...
Yes. I like that, but very long. So, let's clean things out with this Jordan Peterson audio clip. This is probably from, based on what this says, because it's from a book. I think they link it. Maps of Meaning, page 135. So this is probably the audiobook version.
I dreamed I saw my maternal grandmother sitting by the bank of a swimming pool, which was also a river. Her genital region was exposed dimly. It had the appearance of a thick mat of hair. She was stroking herself absent-mindedly. She walked over to me with a handful of pubic hair compacted into something resembling a large artist's paintbrush. She pushed this at my face. I raised my arm several times to deflect her hand. Finally, unwilling to hurt her or interfere with her any further, I let her have her way. She stroked my face with the brush gently and said, like a child, "Isn't it soft?" I looked at her lean face and said, "Yes, Grandma, soft."
Sorry, that... yeah, okay. That, yeah, I'll have to add the other video as a link below. But it's just... okay, I need that. Okay, so, I'm putting everything else on 2x speed. I don't have time for 1x speed. 1x speed is too slow for me. But, like, if you don't know, Xander Hall... I would say Xander Hall and I don't get along. We've never interacted before. He blocked me on Twitter after I put up a video just showing the first part of him. Basically, he had a big framework saying that Dusty Smith is exploiting sex workers, and then Dusty Smith went and immediately explained what he did and how he paid people who are because Dusty Smith apparently did a porn site or whatnot, and he explained why, and then Xander Hall fell back on the weaker, less important argument that he was unnecessarily convinced was a good argument. But, like, I was curious. So, oh yeah, I put that up. I put it on. I maybe put that on Xander Hall's Reddit, and then I got kicked from the Reddit and blocked by Xander Hall. But this is moving forward. It's a recent video, and while I expect certain... So Xanderhall's attitude suggests an aspect of toxic masculinity is still a major factor in his decision making. That said, I'm gonna be honest. I don't expect him to be doing anything that different. A brief look at what he put up didn't suggest that much different, but like, we'll see.
All right, guys, I've been talking about it for a while now. I've been hinting at it. I've been nudging at it. I have been thinking about upgrading my living situation a little bit. You see,
What's about? What? It's just about like moving. Wait, is this just about getting a better place?
Well, I very much do love it. It is quite small. Space, like right up to where it starts to become.
Oh god, I do not care.
The future of our species is at great risk. Master Chief and the other spy.
Like if me and Sherry continue to really push out content, like double uploads every day.
God, that's a lot of ads. Okay, that's a whole lot of I don't give a shit. I thought moving forward, I got tricked into thinking that meant like making better decisions, but it's just about, hey, we might have more money now and buy better stuff, so So I like to keep it up to date with the video industry. Like I said, today's a random day. Today's a random day because
Cars. I can't say that cars particularly interest me unless they're a transformer of some kind, and even then only like the Decepticon ones, like the Stunticons or whatever, because I find most Autobots pretty boring. Like Bumblebee, fun cuck. Today, however, we are talking about vehicles and not with regards to a racing game. We are in fact talking about actual, real-life, honest-to-God cars.
Wait.
Some of you will know where this is going, because something fucking ridiculous is happening involving them. Welcome to hell. Welcome to fucking hell. As easy as this particular topic is to rant and rave and become righteously enraged about, I am struggling to bring myself to it. Because if I have to talk about this, I have to accept that it's real and not a dystopian parody. If I acknowledge this topic, I have to know about this topic, and if I have to know about this topic, I can't deny it exists. Yet here we are, and all week I was inundated with people showing it to me, inundated to such a point that I could not escape the miserable truth that excessive monetization has long escaped the realm of video games and seeped into every pore of modern...
Oh no. Oh no. Capitalism has gone into overdrive.
Life. So yeah, let us speak the heresy, let us tear our eyes open and face the horrifying truth together. They're charging subscriptions for car seat warmers now.
Oh, I hate this. I hate this so much. Dear God. Subscription plan for seat warmers, $17 a month. So many problems. Like you're skipping a step in terms of the cruel monetization practice. You're supposed to start at a low price. A much lower price if you're going to sell seat warmers for a monthly subscription. Also, dear God. I mean, it doesn't surprise me on one level, but fucking hell.
Yeah, that's...
Oh, there's a new oh, okay. In progress. Okay. I will look at that right after this.
That's right. Subscriptions. To make car seats warmer. Jesus fucking Christ. While not exactly a video game related topic, enough viewers told me I had to expose myself to this grim capitalistic nightmare that I'm passing the misery on to the rest of you. BMW.
How dare you? How dare you? Pass the misery onto me. I mean, that's what I would do, but like, how dare you do it?
You see, in all its shameless inglory, announced it would start selling subscriptions for heated seats that start at 15 quid a month. 15 quid for warm seats, for something cars have simply had in the past without the need to pay a perpetual fucking stipend to the manufacturer. Very much like on-disc DLC, cars will naturally have the ability to heated seats built in, and you'll be paying to unlock it. Essentially, you're not paying to have something new added, you're paying to stop something being withheld from you. As with many naked cash grabs lately, the blame has been put on things like COVID and the war in Ukraine, as if we're to believe that corporations haven't had a history of charging for literally anything it could get away with charging, and that both the pandemic and the war have been used to excuse so much fucking greed and cruelty already that it's kind of an old fucking routine by this point. In another parallel to the game industry, we're being told that cars are just too expensive to make, as if the executives in this industry aren't millionaires and billionaires raking in obscene amounts of profits at the expense of an underpaid workforce. It's not just seats, either. BMW's Connected Drive store offers a suite of what is essentially DLC for real-life vehicles, warming steering wheels, high beams that automatically switch off for incoming traffic, all sorts of shit. All sorts of opportunities to give a multi-billion-dollar company even more money on top of the thousands you've given them already. Yep, this all sounds...
Dear God. I hate it. I hate, yeah.
Sounds very familiar. As video game audiences, we're used to seeing companies take the utter piss out of our wallets more than most. We're used to expensive video games offering incremental add-ons, endless spending opportunities via microtransactions, in-game gambling systems typified by loot boxes, and, of course, subscription services for access to servers, extra content, or sometimes just the right to play the games already fucking paid for. I think we could credit gaming for paving a not insignificant amount of the road to the over-monetized society we find ourselves in. We certainly saw how effectively the gaming industry was able to normalize subscription access to things that we never had to pay for before when Microsoft successfully paywalled online multiplayer behind Xbox Live. Many younger players by now will have grown up with the idea that we always paid a subscription to play online games, but I am ancient and decrepit enough to remember when the idea was not only new, but pretty controversial. What Microsoft did was disruptive and seen by many at the time as avaricious, but after all these years, Microsoft has normalized it to the point that nobody questions it anymore. It's now simply the way it's always been. It's the same process we saw with microtransactions, which were always controversial back in the day, but now only make headlines when they're truly exorbitant, like with Diablo Immortal. Slow, grinding, insistent normalization is one of the most insidious tools in the pocket of big business. And we're seeing this normalizing creep towards subscriptions appear everywhere now. Many products have begun moving away from one-time purchases to endlessly charging so-called services. Things that were once straightforward products are now perpetually premium scams, such as Adobe moving to an enforced subscription model for no justifiable reason, or Microsoft fucking Office of all things. Oh, and here's your regular reminder.
Yeah, I fucking hate that aspect of Microsoft Office. That's why I don't use Microsoft Office. Because I'm not gonna pay a subscription service for a Word document. What's wrong with you?
To the piracy is fun. Mobile app stores are lousy with this, as things that have no business being packaged as services are nevertheless sold so, because as we always say here, no amount of money is ever really fucking enough for these assholes. Of course, subscriptions have long been a favourite of companies who want endless money for as little as possible. Not only do they mean regular payments that last longer and cost more over time than one-off purchases, research indicates that a huge number of customers forget to cancel subscriptions after they stop using them. This is something that free trial periods bank on exploiting.
Yeah, yeah, I hate that. I hate that because I know that, I have forgotten about subscriptions before, so I cancel 30-day free things right away.
Sign up now for 30 days free! Just make sure you leave us your credit card details up front, and if you forget about us after the 30 days, thank you very much for that $19.99. When you consider exactly how many subscriptions we're expected to sign up for these days, it only gets harder and harder to keep track of what you use and don't use. In gaming alone, you have Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, and Nintendo Switch Online, each with their own additional service tiers, EA Play, Google Play, Apple Arcade, Ubisoft Plus, Nvidia GeForce Now, Prime Gaming, and Google Stadia. This is on top of individual MMO subscriptions and the slew of battle passes infesting games more and more. And the normalizing of a subscription-based life is starting to really ramp up in all facets of the day-to-day. It's a little gauche to point at something and say, oh, it's like that Black Mirror episode, but so much of it is like that Black Mirror episode, 15 million merits. The best one. And it's at times like this, looking at subscription-based seat warmers, that I remember how many people have gotten mad at me before for pointing out that capitalism is the driving force behind all the shit people hate about mainstream game publishing.
Yeah. I mean, that's always been the criticism. And, I mean,
This is such a clear-cut example of how everything we discuss weekly involving excessive video game monetization and customer exploitation can be applied to the world outside gaming, and should be applied to the world outside gaming, because it's fucking important. It's important to understand how much all of you are being taken for a fucking ride. This is such a perfect look at exactly how connected everything really is. Shit don't happen in a bubble, people. And on that note, it is with particular disgust that I point out how both in and out of games, corporate scumlords have decided now is the time to ramp up prices, find extra ways to charge us for things, and attempt to swindle us for all we have via cash grab attempts such as NFTs. Now, when energy costs have risen far above stagnating wages, when a pandemic has brought us to our knees, when the climate is rapidly approaching inhospitability, now is when they charge more, when they fleece us further, when they try to scam us harder than ever. Almost. Almost. As if they know we're on the verge of fucking societal collapse and they're just strip mining our lives before it's all over. Google Stadia's done a thing though.
Yeah, that reminds me of Charlie the Unicorn near the end, where it's just like, but think about, it's like, oh yeah, I gave all the information away, and they decide not to genocide us in 5 years, but they gave us like all this money. It's like, think about, but we've got all this money. Like, think about how great those 5 years are gonna be.
Lol. Now I can lift this time. Using my strength.
You're strong, huh?
Using all of my professional wrestler's strength.
Alright, turn it the other way. I'll look that.
Does it look better the other way?
Yeah. It's better that one.
Oh. Check this out, right? You can see feats of strength like this at some of the wrestling shows that I am at. The wrestling dates include August 6th in Leicester at the Y Theatre with Resurgence Wrestling. Oh my God, it's raining already. August 20th in Newcastle at the Jubilee Club for Avant-Garde Wrestling, and I will actually be doing another day earlier that day in Preston, but I don't have details on that yet. What is the other one? Oh my God! Oh no! October 1st in Manchester, Sovereign Pro Wrestling. That's with the 8-person tag match with Kid Bandit. No, elimination match with Kid Bandit. I've got OCD, like genuine, like medical grade. This is literally the worst thing that's ever happened to me. October 8th for Blackpool. Commander Sterling versus Simon Miller. The big one. I've got to wash my hands. Thank God for me. I've got to wash my... Turn it off. Turn it off.
But, oh. What? What went wrong? Something went wrong. Also, I regret accidentally. Why is it studio dot? Did I copy the? Did just add studio to it? I hate Google. Google. Well, I mean, Google doesn't.
Why do I care so much what people think about me? I think I'm gay.
I thought you said short. What do you mean? That's not short.
Oh no, but
I'm still gonna watch it, but like, I'm just saying it's not. Yeah. Okay, apparently the mouse has something's being wonky. Mouse is deciding to click. So. Okay.
No. Sorry, I had to. Okay, I didn't have to, but I felt like it, because that's honestly how much time this topic should need at this point. But let's get into it anyways, because that's what we do here on youtube.com/GaylorCornCob. This is an unplanned and impromptu video that only exists because I'm kind of annoyed, bothered. Here's what's bothering me tonight. There's a certain homophobic myth that gets thrown around quite frequently by people.
Their average 1 hour 30, so short. Yeah, short for them.
Who think they are absolutely not being homophobic. Many even think they are being allies. It's the gay homophobe, sweaty. And it's a trope at this point. It's known as Haggard's Law, or the law of inverse homosexuality, that the more vocally opposed a person is to homosexuality, the more likely they are to be gay themselves and closeted. You know, the self-hating baguette who becomes a raging bigot out of envy, fear, or projection. A virulent homophobe. You see this character in the media quite often, the gay basher. It happened to Justin in the original US Queer as Folk. It happened to Kurt on Glee. Slate had an article called Homophobic? Maybe you're gay. Which is honestly enough and banger of a title. I don't agree with the politics behind it or the science behind it, but I would click on that. Maybe I am gay. Or even songs about this. One of the best examples, and a previously ironic but now kind of genuine problematic fave of mine, is Jewel's Pieces of You.
She came out there on that stage and dropped some hard F-bombs and walked out of there feeling like ally of the freaking year.
Oh,
Which is what's
wow.
happening on social media. It's being said by well-meaning cis straight people, but occasionally it's not just the straight people saying it. And that's more of what I want to talk about right now. Gather round, my Caelans. It's time for a found family meeting. I'm going to use a specific tweet as an example, but I've intentionally blocked off their name and identifying info, and I don't want you to look for it, because this isn't actually about them or their tweet. But the tweet was the catalyst for me deciding to make this video, and remains a perfect specimen of the kind of illogical thinking that I'm talking about. So here's what the now deleted tweet said.
Controversial statement, but I don't believe there's a virulently homophobic man alive who hasn't either had sex with men or wants to.
If you're thinking, hey, they're right, you hear about this on American News Network all the time. It's totally a real phenomenon. I empathize with having that reaction, but this is a textbook example of confirmation bias. You see a few articles and you start to think, hey, this is happening with a pretty noticeable frequency. Maybe there's a pattern to this. And then you see it a few more times, and you're like, oh, okay, now there's definitely too many examples for this to be a coincidence. And then eventually we get to, okay, this completely confirms what I've started to believe. With so many examples, how could it not? Well, what if every time someone committed a homophobic hate crime or enacted anti-queer legislation or kicked their kid out for being gay, you saw a headline saying, virulent homophobe is discovered to be straight? You'd probably start to think, hey, it seems like a very small number of these people are secretly gay in actuality. But you don't see those articles because straight person is homophobic isn't going to end in ad revenue. And I get why, because a secretly gay homophobe is salacious, it's delicious, it's content, it's cathartic. So cathartic to be able to say, you see this politician enacting anti-gay bills? He's sucking on twin coal like he's trying to become the next human centipede. He's no better than I am. But there's a danger in seeing these cases and using them as the baseline.
Twinkle trying to become the next human centipede might be the best line ever.
All of the most dangerous homophobic men are just actually secretly gay or into dudes, then the hate crimes they commit, the dangers they pose, the harassment they inflict, are now no longer oppression, born from systemic issues, but simply inter-community violence. More than that, it's just wrong. They're not morally wrong. Well, I do probably think it's a little morally wrong, but because it's just not scientifically backed up by anything. If you watch my gender critical series, you know what I'm about to discuss. The actual root of most homophobia. Disgust. Pure, undiluted disgust. The kind of disgust that makes your top lip curl, your skin crawl, and your blood boil. It's the kind of disgust I feel when I think of someone I believe to be totally irredeemable, unfit for society. And the thought of them alone is enough to turn my stomach. It's how I feel when I see stories of a child groomer or a white supremacist. And I react in a way that I don't actually react to any other human being. I'm repelled, repulsed, and I get the urge to, completely out of character for me, do as the Antifa say and punch a Nazi. I mean, personally, I wouldn't actually, because I don't do the whole violence thing. When the revolution comes, I'll be rolling joints, tilling soil, sucking Antifa super soldier dick. But the urge to be like, you don't deserve to exist in society, have some soup for my family. That's the feeling that bubbles up when a normal person
Yeah, I mean that is the mood. No, human centipede.
about someone who sexually assaults children. That pure disgust, that same feeling is where a lot of homophobia stems from. There's a reason why they call us groomers just for being queer, because internally they have the same reaction to both. And that kind of disgust, it has nothing to do with hating yourself. You're not saying queer people are similar to child abusers, just that the people who are disgusted by queer people often don't see a distinction between us and them. It's the same visceral reaction. It propels us into a self-protective action to ensure our survival against what our body or our mind perceives as harmful, distasteful, or otherwise offensive. When I discuss what homophobia and transphobia are, I always include the word disgust. Distrust, disgust, fear, hatred, or prejudice. These are the emotions underlying homophobia. Outside of the community, the disgust towards queer people isn't usually included in their understanding of these terms, but numerous studies have been done across the world that show that disgust plays a huge role in their perception of us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. That's one of those things where you hear it and you're just like, yeah, no, that is like everything they say suggests a level of disgust. And that's same with transphobia, obviously. Oh yeah, I mean, they mentioned that.
The reason the reaction to disgust is so strong is that it's often associated with the sense that something you consider pure has been tainted or violated. To homophobic men, that can be anything from gender roles or norms, the sanctity of masculinity, men's dominion over women, or God's divine plan. And the rejection of those things as outdated or harmful dilutes their power. And it always comes back to power. The disgust at impurity fosters an outrage that feels moral to them, like there's only one course of action to take when someone is so detrimental to the fabric of society, so dangerous to the people in that society. You have no choice. You have to get rid of them. Which, when we're talking about a serial child rape, pretty much everyone would agree that a society cannot abide people like that existing within it. And if you heard a story about 3 men beating up someone like that, you'd feel entirely justified in feeling no empathy for that person. But often, when homophobes hear the story of 3 men attacking me, that same lack of empathy applies. And I know, based on the comments I've gotten, because disgust is where the lines in the sand are drawn. So the argument that the homophobes are gay actually crowd is making is that that disgust has been internalized. It's self-disgust that gets projected outwards. And you can sort of see the argument when it's like, a guy attacks a man he's attracted to because he's so disgusted with himself that he turns that disgust outward and makes the object of his desire into the subject of his blame and his shame, and then eventually violence. And that totally happens. Of course it does. We live in a super homophobic society. So obviously those messages are going to be internalized. But there's absolutely no scientific evidence to say that that is the norm. And in reference to this tweet, it's patently ridiculous to think it's the rule. That theory falls apart even under the tamest scrutiny. Like, for example, a man finds out his child is gay and pours boiling water on him. Must have wanted to fuck dudes, right? A man attacks 2 lesbians on a train. Oh, just wants that pussy. A man kicks his gay son out because his church says homosexuality is a sin. Ugh, total bottom-amy, right? Like, it makes no sense. But disgust and the anger and fear born from it absolutely work to explain those situations. Every single one of these examples is easily explained by disgust born from seeing gayness and queerness as impurities. Now, lots of people brought this up to the original person who wrote that tweet. Their response was,
I think it's quite interesting how people are equating has sex with men with gay. Straight men have sex with men, people. Sorry.
The implication that the worst homophobes are all just self-identifying straight men who have sex with men? Like... So I responded as politely as I possibly could, or as much as I can make myself, and said, with all due respect, I would suggest that you don't fully grasp homophobia and its root, which is disgust. Blaming homophobia on men who want to men when sometimes they simply want to fucking kill them is controversial because it's homophobic. I'm replying instead of quote tweeting because I'm trying to be respectful here, but this is an absolutely an abhorrent take that ignores the very real hatred that is born of disgust of the other. And while this particular person has a large following and a bit of a reputation for being temperamental, I was a little confused by their reaction, and I got to thinking, a dangerous pastime. I know. What possible usefulness is there in saying homophobic men are actually all out f***ing the dudes? What reason is there other than to serve as a gotcha moment? And why is that considered a gotcha at all? I don't see people bringing up the sexual history of other bigots, so it seems pretty obvious to me that the point is, you're a hypocrite, a self-hating little git. If we're disgusting, so are you. Ha, gotcha, nasty. But like, really, that's who we want to be? Weaponizing the disgust that leads to us being attacked, killed, and oppressed against the people committing those acts? Does that further our liberation? Does that tip the scales in our favor? Or is it just petty cathartic shitposting? And if it is, what purpose does that serve? And I mean, I love me some petty cathartic shitposting. I started a podcast to do just that and only that, because I needed an outlet for that. But why do we do this? I don't think it's because we actually think it's an epic dunk to call a homophobe gay. I don't think we're secretly all homophobic ourselves. I think it's just less terrifying, less depressing, less hopelessness-inducing than believing that the issue is systemic and widespread. It's less jarring to think, you hate me because you want a beanie, than you hate me because you fundamentally don't think I should be allowed to exist in society. Only one of those make a super cute t-shirt. That's not the second one. That mentality reinforces harmfulness about queer people, redirects all onus for violence back onto us, and either ignores or erases the roots of our oppression. Well, I would say that's actually detrimental to combating that oppression. How do you effectively fight homophobia when you obfuscate its causes? And I guess it's not quippy enough to say that toxic masculinity, religious indoctrination, white supremacy, patriarchy, transphobia, misogyny all contribute to the disgust that informs homophobia. You know, nuance and intersectionality. I don't believe anything that can't fit in a tweet. People often justify believing this homophobic myth by referencing a 1996 study that concluded that self-identified homophobic straight men were aroused by gay porn, while the non-homophobic straight dudes were not. This study was done using only 64 men 2.5 decades ago, and the authors noted that they had trouble finding non-homophobic men, which, like, of course you did. There's been a huge cultural shift since then, but back then, most men would not have honestly told you if they were gay, or even not disgusted by the gays, because then they themselves would be guilty by association and assumed to be gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that. What studies can show is that there is a link between repressed homosexuality and homophobia. Duh. There's no science at all to conclude that homophobic men on average are gay or attracted to men. At best, you could say, men may use homophobia to protect themselves from homophobia, which is
sort of the it sounds like the logical fallacy is not by Caelan, but Caelan's pointing out the logical fallacy, like paper is dry, therefore everything dry is paper type thing. I mean, that's not the best example, but you get the point. It's missing a major thing. Most just because some people fit into a particular category doesn't mean it applies as a causal description.
Which is not a hot take, she's not controversial, and not the same as the blanket assumption that all of the worst homophobes are secretly gay. Thought experiment. What if they were gay? Just gay and scared, terrified. Maybe they come from an incredibly homophobic family, or live in a right-to-work state, and lose everything they have if they come out. So they push it down. They try and hide the best way they can. They go on the defensive by going on the attack. Or they're worried that they'd be mocked and ridiculed and ostracized for being gay, have no community. Is our mocking and ridiculing their supposed gayness helping? Are we creating a world where people feel safe pushing off the homophobia they've been fed and subsequently internalized? Or are we just pushing these people farther back into the closet and into their hatred? No, it's not our fault that they're homophobic, but it is our fault when we are. And to the cis-straighties, the straggots, the NQCs, if you see somebody being homophobic, you can just call them a piece of shit instead of calling them gay. There should be a difference between those things in your mind. Just be done. Thanks for watching my first low production video. There's no CGI set besties, just you, me, and Crystal Marinero over here. I'm going to be doing more of these in between the more extra AF ones to release some of the pressure and prevent rushing out videos that I don't feel are done. If you want me weekly, subscribe to Respect the Dead on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. Do both though, please. Click that thingy and subscribe, please, because we need 1,000 subscribers on that YouTube account to access all the features and monetization shit. Not like we're really going to make money, but it would be nice to be able to put links in our videos. Special, huge, amazing, unending thanks to my patrons on Patreon, for who I am now relying on for my entire existence, because this is my whole last job. Sign up for a couple bucks a month to get access to like zines and behind-the-scenes posts, and at one of the higher tiers, hide stuff in my CGI sets. Follow me on Twitter if you love me and hate yourself. I'm annoying. If you're making video essays on YouTube and you're a smaller creator and want to be featured in an upcoming spotlight, send an email over to the Addy in the description box with your name, your pronouns, a link to one of your videos, and a little bit about yourself and your channel. That's all, besties. Love you, bye.
Okay, I'll have to factor that in. Job opportunities now. So, dear God, why am I doing this to myself? this is either going to end very quickly. I'm going to go onto the dog video and end this, which is the outcome I hope to have. So, here's the thing. Based on Vaush's personality, I get the impression that he tries to put the best of himself out there, which, I mean, I guess to some degree everybody does. But in terms of live content, he's less likely to hide some of his worst traits. So I feel like I might actually need a set of notes just in case. Let me just open up Notepad. I am just might be regretting, but because this deals with Anne Frank, and even though this might be a terrible idea, because, I mean, I can answer this right now. So either this is trying to shame a bad take, or this is trying to justify a bad take, and I don't know which one. Because, yeah, Anne Frank did have white privilege. I'm gonna say that now, but, like, yeah.
Okay. The world has enough going on right now without me trawling the the frigid depths of Twitter to find something funny to comment on. But then this ended up on TMZ, so I feel like I kind of have to throw my hat in the ring. My white boy hat, which I guess would be a fedora. The fedoras were originally a woman's hat, I think. What's the true white boy hat? You know, like the just a baseball cap? I don't know.
I'm generally not. Vaush has put up enough red flags for me that I am always a bit more on edge watching his content.
Anyway, Anne Frank, she had white privilege Twitter debates. It should be my YouTube titles. Okay, I know this is very low-hanging fruit, but I swear I'm going to make something productive out of this, okay? So yeah, Twitter discourse. Now, as is often the case when stuff like this blows up, the discourse is like 1% the original bad take, and 99% people making fun of it. Bad take. So I don't think this is necessarily indicative of a gigantic surge of crazy lefties who are arguing that Anne Frank should be canceled for failing to account for her white privilege in her diary or whatever, you know. Just a few crazies here, but I think there's something interesting to pull out here, okay? When did this person block me? When did I block this person? You know what, I'm not even getting into it. It's every time, man. Hold on, I want to make sure I say this carefully. Yeah, Anne Frank had white privilege. Bad things happen to people with white privilege also, but don't tell the whites that. Okay, wow, what a statement.
Okay, that's a lukewarm take.
Hold on, I want to make sure I say this carefully. Yeah, Anne Frank had white privilege. Bad things happen to people with white privilege also, but don't tell the whites that. Okay, wow, what a statement. Let's break it down. Whew, let's break it down. Huh? Yeah, okay. So apparently the broader context of the discourse was people arguing whether or not. I think it originally started with the idea that white queer people have privilege in the incoming fascist dystopia over non-white people.
That's looking at things from an end goal. Dear God, I am. Fuck, I might actually have to watch this video. I hate this. Why do I do this to myself? Why do I find things to torture myself? Maybe I enjoy the pain. Maybe that's why. To be fair, I am a lot more expressive when I am seeing awful stuff, and I'm at the very least entertaining myself. So.
Because white queer people are capable of disguising the fact that they're queer, which is true to an extent, though the efficacy of that is...
Okay, but that's not... Nobody says it for that reason. Okay, not nobody, but like almost nobody. Dear... How do I put this? No. No, I just. So like, most people when they're talking about this, they're talking about like, because people notice things first. So oh, what was bell hooks? Bell hooks, great philosopher. She talks about this in a lot of how feminism, because women are oppressed and black women are oppressed, and part of the whole thing with intersectionality is some of the reason why intersectionality is so important is because white women don't have to deal with the racism that black women do. Black women can't escape through any of their privileges. And being white is a privilege. No. I accidentally full screened that for a second. I'm glad you didn't have to see that. I accidentally full screened for a second, and I had to look at Vaush's face up close, and I do not.
Kind of called into question by modern surveillance methods, but whereas non-white people have no way of hiding the fact that they're non-white. And then this got turned into other arguments over visible versus invisible privilege. And then you have Anne Frank, who was of course white, but also Jewish, and you can kind of see how the discourse spiraled out of control there. So obviously this is phenomenally stupid, you know, even having this conversation. It's a little bit like talking about like the height privilege of like Native Americans who were killed by you know, marauding bands of Western expansionist American you know, pioneers. It's a phenomenally brain damaged topic. It just sort of radiates an aura of stupidity around it.
So obviously he hasn't actually made a point here. He just says if you disagree with him, you are ignorant. And if you agree with him, you are correct. And I have a problem with that framing because it inherently puts you on the back foot if you are to make any sort of argument against a position he's making, because because he said it's a dumb position. Any argument against him, he just said by the framework he used, any argument against what he says is a bad argument, and any argument he makes is a much more intellectually secure argument. Right off the bat, he hasn't even made like a point, like an actual point.
But there's really no reason to talk about it at all. But I think there's something interesting underneath the first layer of crippling stupidity that I wanted to.
How? See, I don't listen to people like this much, so hearing the outright ableism and the pompous nature of the way Vaush frames it, and I realize he says he frames it ironically by he's a twerp. Yeah.
Touch on that actually relates to another Twitter thread that I saw. I saw this right before, and I can't see the whole thread now because the person who made the original thread hid all their tweets. But this is another one of those times where like more of the discourse has been condemning the original take than the prior. But you know, in this case, the original thread got tens of thousands of likes, which was yeah. So I was let me see if I can find it 1 second. If I was smart, I would have had this up already. I think it's in my.
Like it was a lukewarm take. It's
yeah. Frida Kahlo, the known wisely by many of my American compatriots as Mexican Eyebrow Lady, the famed artist and you know, advocate for indigenous rights and so on. There was a big thread canceling her by saying that she's actually mixed race or was appropriating the culture. She's mestizo or whatever. Here we go. Yeah, I don't need to hear this, but Frida Kahlo was a white woman who larped as an indigenous person, so she.
Yeah, no, I don't know how he can fit so much ableism into one sentence. It's a skill. So this is a completely different conversation. This is a completely unrelated conversation that he feels he can more easily argue against, which is very common. He's creating a false association because white privilege has absolutely nothing to do with this argument. This is with relation to Frida Kahlo's background, and I don't know much about Frida Kahlo, nor am I going to look into this because this is a complete side tangent. So I wonder if he's just going to argue against this and not the other. Choose mixed and disabled as AF. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me, but like, and I don't know this person, and I don't know if they're a troll. That's the thing. I don't know this person or if they're a troll. I mean, the title of this person's Twitter is Resident Commie, so like. This could be Vaush arguing against a troll to justify his argument against a completely different argument, as if they're the same.
You get support as an artist. The regalia you see in her work is not anything from her family, but from the Oaxaca. I'll take a guess. Who often work in her house. This is a lie. It's just
It might not even be a word. I don't know. Okay, that's a state. That's okay. Yeah. Like she was hit by a bus, yeah.
she wore her grandma's clothes. You can see it's.
Why do I care so much what people think about me? I think I'm gay.
Yeah, kind of stumbling through this a little bit here because I want to get to the point and I don't want to showcase the fact that I know almost nothing about this work. But there's a broader point that I want to make, okay? And it's I feel like it's pretty obvious that we're living in an era of rapidly increasing reactionary sentiment, and I think in times like this, there's often.
I mean, I agree that there's an increasing amount of reactionary sentiment. That being said, oftentimes the way Vaush frames things is reactionary, and I don't know if he realizes that he's doing the thing that he's arguing against, or if he even cares.
Often a kind of circular firing squad mentality that people develop, where they try to fight over like the pathetic trickle of privilege that they can get or deny with other people who are in similar positions. Contra talked about this a lot. You know, the idea that people who are in close proximity to each other are more likely to fight over clout that is sort of collectively potentially theirs than they are to unite against.
I'm not gonna try to pronounce it again. I assume I probably slaughtered it and didn't pronounce it correctly or something. I don't want to even do that again. Because yeah.
The broader issue, or the groups that are maybe more deserving of criticism. We see this all throughout history in the form of worker struggles, where it's the primary goal often of the capitalist to exacerbate and prompt as much infighting as possible amidst the working class.
Yeah, but you need to know that someone is fighting for you. I know I'm arguing as if I'm arguing against Vaush. Vaush isn't going to see this because chances are, unlike Xander Hall, he's not going to completely always look for his name. I could be wrong. I could be wrong about that. But no. I mean, like, oh yes, capitalism does do that. But like, if we're talking about infighting, everyone needs to know that they're being fought for. To join a movement, you have to know that that movement is fighting for your rights. And if they say stuff to suggest that they don't care about your rights, then there's less of a reason to believe that they are fighting for your rights. That's why there are certain elements of importance to promoting the intersectionality of stuff.
If you have people arguing over racial or ethnic or national divisions, if they're less likely to realize that people of all colors and creed are being oppressed by the bourgeoisie, workers of the world unite.
Yes, people are all being oppressed by capitalism, but like a lot of the problem. So the problem Vaush is describing is something that happens with poor white people fighting against people of color. Oftentimes, I feel like people of color are more likely to be already aware of that and just concerned that a white person spouting shit isn't actually fighting for them or acknowledging aspects of privilege that do exist. And they don't know who, like, if you're in a marginalized group and you don't know who your ally is, you have to suss them out. And if you're saying a bunch of stuff, if the person is saying a bunch of stuff that's yellow or red flags, yeah, they're not going to like you.
Et cetera, et cetera. And the way this takes shape in like racialized discourse, especially amidst non-privileged people, like POC or members of ethnic minorities, is always really interesting because obviously, as a proud advocate for racial equality, I am fully of the opinion that racial minorities are capable of being completely fucking insufferable, just like non-racial minorities. As a real ally to the people of color around the world. Truly, we're all of us, our souls are capable of just immeasurably distasteful behavior, as evidenced by the.
So this is a talking point that is used by conservatives a lot. It's a common talking point. It says it's everyone's flawed. Therefore, I treat everyone. Therefore, like I treat everyone equally. Everyone's flawed. That sort of thing. It's very. It's a very conservative talking point, which is why people don't think that Vaush, which is why people don't think that Vaush actually cares, because he's using talking points that are the same as people on the far. This is a talking point that I could imagine Ben Shapiro using. It's incredibly not based on anything outside of saying I'm a good person, I care about you, and everyone's flawed. Yeah.
The Anne Frank stuff, clearly that's something we're all capable of repping. But there's an underlying current of essentialism.
Wait, is he? Yeah, because you said riffing, right?
Something we're all capable of repping.
Something we're all capable of repping. What does he mean by that? I don't.
But there's an underlying current of essentialism here that I think connects these two instances of brain damage. That's the more interesting thing that I wanted to touch on here. Talking about white privilege with Anne Frank.
So once again, not a helpful argument. It's essentially saying that. I mean, this is now saying that brain damage equals inherent levels of ignorance, which is not how the brains are complicated. It's not how brains work, and it's more ableism because he likes to create the hierarchies to put himself up a certain amount.
And apart from the obvious problems with that, but in addition, talking about like Frida's alleged appropriation of indigenous culture in Mexico, despite it running in her family and so on, I think that there's an underlying trend of implied.
Yeah, no, I know he meant representing, but I don't know. I don't understand how that sentence fit with the tweet, because the tweet was about involved Anne Frank and white privilege, and a tweet back later. Trees. Okay. I'll see you later. It was 4 p.m. Eastern, not 3. I think I told you 3. It's 4 p.m. Eastern. I will be on Twitch. So.
Racial essentialization there that people are running to as a defense mechanism in times of racial crisis, which we certainly are in, given the state of politics in this country.
This is a lot of almost word salad.
Explicit attitudes towards race issues that Republicans have adopted. Oh god, my brain is so scattered. Oh, imagine if I was trying to do this while live streaming. Let me try to take a step back. Let me think of it this way. Okay, what is the problem with the statement Anne Frank had white privilege? Anne Frank was white. I mean, there were photos of the girl, right? And white people in Germany at that time would have been privileged over non-white people, right? So why does the statement Anne Frank had white privilege, cause brain damage? Well, the immediate assumption would be because, obviously, she died in the Holocaust, which sort of erases any potential.
Oh, repping as a bad thing we all do. Okay.
Marker of privilege, but I actually think that's a bad counter-argument because it's anti-intersectional. The argument that Anne Frank couldn't have had white privilege because she was targeted for being Jewish would be tantamount to saying that men can't have privilege in the case of like a black man who was targeted for his race. Like does this black guy who got shot by the police, does he have like male privilege? Also a good brain damage question, by the way. And
really needs to rework his dialogue. Seriously.
And the answer in that case would be yeah. He would have male privilege. It just wouldn't have been relevant to the circumstances of his killing because it was more of a race thing probably. Though with police shootings, it is a race and gender thing. Black men are far more likely to get shot by police than black women are. And frankly, the criminal justice system is actually more biased against men in general than it seems to be along racial lines, as I understand it. But we kind of overlook that. It's pretty cringe. In terms of disparate sentencing and what have you. But anyway. So where's the brain damage coming from? I think.
What? He's saying that's bad, and it's ignorant for that tweet to have been made. But we are halfway through the video, and he has not explained why he considers it to be bad, really. He's just said it's bad. A lot.
You could argue that it's a kind of like wrong time, wrong place situation. Like, okay, maybe Anne Frank had white privilege. Sure, maybe. But clearly it wasn't relevant to like the life that she lived. You know what I mean? Like, sure, fine, maybe. But that's not really what determined the trajectory of her life and the experiences she had with more powerful institutions. It wasn't exactly her whiteness that determined the nature of those interactions. It was her Jewishness. And it is true, it is a wrong time, wrong place thing, but I still don't think that's a valid counter-argument. I actually think the main sort of brain damage aura generation unit here would come from the fact that whiteness as a concept is a really, really fluid and historically contextual thing, and applying.
What's the one question I get asked the most? What pans do you use at home? Well, today, I'm ready
to get in retrospect to somebody like Anne Frank, when the racial dynamics of Nazi Germany were very, very different to the racial dynamics of modern-day America, which is what we're using as a sort of reference frame when we talk about white privilege. And you have to.
Not exactly. So, not exactly. Oftentimes there are various classes of people, and some people were just not thought of. Obviously, it's not uncommon that people who are there are various stages of whiteness. History. I don't think that the Nazis went after a lot of people, and it's yes, there's a lot more hate against Judaism at the time, especially in Germany, not even especially, just all throughout the world at the time of the Holocaust, but people cared about what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust and people don't care what happened to the gypsies in the the Romani people in the Holocaust. That's my bad. I'm used to certain terminology in terms of usageness, and I apologize for that. But the Romani, the fact that we don't care about the Romani people suggests that they are put into a lower class, and there's various things like that where I don't know how much people cared about LGBTQ people. Like it's one of those things where there's a level of closeness to whiteness, and there are varying amounts of white privilege depending on who you are, or at the very least, not so much varying levels of white privilege, but there are various things that are the counteract aspects of white privilege, but it's yeah.
By the way, whenever a person talks about white privilege, they're talking from a reference point. Privilege, much like speed, exists only in reference to other things. There's no such thing as innate privilege in a truly, fundamental sense. It has to be contextualized by something. Much in the same way that, I may be moving at 0 miles per hour relative right now to the ground, but I'm moving tens of thousands of kilometers per hour relative to the sun. Oh god, I just accidentally slipped into kilometers there. Eurofication. Truly, I must be sick. If you talk about white privilege here in the States, you're using the States as a reference point. White privilege here is not white privilege elsewhere, Are white people privileged in the same way in Japan or, India or Russia? It's different everywhere. And in some places, that privilege on an individual level might be relatively minute, because white privilege, as is the case with most ethnic privileges around the world, is usually tied into a kind of national place of belonging. White people are privileged in America and much of Europe because these are presumed to be white countries in the sense that they were historically governed predominantly by white people, usually by white supremacists who built systems with the assumption that they would exist for the benefit primarily of white people. And, this poisons the groundwater. It takes a while to get out. But if you go over to, say, India, there are privileges associated with you being there, but how much of that is white privilege versus American privilege?
Okay, but that's an irrelevant point.
How much of that is the privilege of relative wealth? If you go over to India, odds are you're going to be wealthier than the vast majority of people who are there, just because it's a poorer country than here. But if you're of the same socioeconomic status, and let's say you were born in India as a white person, do you have privilege there as that? Maybe, yeah, in some ways. I imagine in some other ways you would probably be treated like a bit of an outsider in the same way that many non-white people are treated as outsiders in places in Europe and America. That's not to say white privilege doesn't exist, only that it's contextual. The context that you are sort of referring to when you use that term is Americentric in online discourse, unless specified otherwise, because America rules the world. And
But white privilege exists in England and Germany and all these countries, and it's not.
It is highly inappropriate to apply that framework to a place like Nazi Germany, which has such an incredibly different attitude. I don't need to go into that, do I? About the racial politics of Nazi Germany to explain why there's a difference, Not to say there aren't, commonalities. There are plenty of Nazi supporters in America at the time and are still today. But things were different. Certainly Fred and Frank, who...
Okay, but things were different. There are things that were different, there are things that are the same. I don't understand what sort of argument he's making. It's a very non-argument. He's just saying that things were different, and therefore what? The statement? Like, why? I might be hitting the why point.
If she had been regarded only by whiteness in America then or today, probably would have been treated as a member of the hegemonic power group, and in Germany, she was killed for it. So, it's the essentialization that bothers me. It's the way people will default to modes of understanding that make sense to them now, and then try to apply them everywhere at every point in time in this universalist, it's not even a word, universalist, it's universal, this just wide-spanning framework that kind of essentializes the issue at hand. It makes whiteness out to be an essential category. Whiteness isn't just having light skin, after all,
This feels like levels of nitpicky that seem to be attacking something because it was unpopular. That's the general vibe I'm getting from this, because he doesn't seem to have much of a point against it outside of the fact that Anne Frank's white privilege didn't matter too much because of Germany's the Holocaust happening, much like anyone who's LGBT during the Holocaust also were being genocided, and their whiteness didn't really matter as much because there is something else that was more important. That being said, there are various other complicated factors because obviously not every person was genocided. Like there was a Jewish there were Jewish people who worked with the Nazis or other more complicated things like that.
Being white was just not a thing 4,000 years ago. Light-skinned people were a thing for.
Yeah, here's about 4,000 years ago. Most of society has been built up from like a couple thousand, or like no more than that, but like it's complicated. Society changes over time. Cool, but like
4,000 years ago.
Dear God, fuck you ads.
Link all your cards and track your shopping in one app.
Our understanding of what it means to be a white person is a relatively modern phenomenon. You know, like you couldn't go back to 4,000 years ago and go like, oh yes, of course. Well, we have white people up here in the north, and then we have swarthy Mediterranean people down here in Greece.
What is the point
It'll be
of this?
These are black people in northern Africa, you know, and like, okay, so these are Middle Eastern people. They're kind of like half black, half Asian. That's how the races work, you know. You could get halfway through explaining this to some like Macedonian soldier before they club you over the head and eat you. I don't know what the Mesopotamian. I don't know. You know, it wasn't like that back then. They had the
They wouldn't understand your language. This is pointless.
Stupid, arbitrary ways of categorizing people. We wouldn't want to make universal the category of whiteness, because if we did that, we would be legitimizing it. You know, we would be bolstering it, and I think that's dumb. The Frida Kahlo thing goes right back into this too. The idea of accusing, you know, a mixed race person of appropriating indigenous culture, even though they're descendant from indigenous people, suggests a weird kind of self-defeating logic where you guarantee.
Like, I don't know how many, once again, I don't know how many of the people he's attacking are just trolls, and how many people are just wrong argument at the wrong time, and apparently
the extinction of indigenous culture outside of the racially pure indigenous circles, which is kind of weird. You know, there is an unfortunate tendency to adopt. I want to open this kind of. Yeah, a lot of non-white communities online get very comfortable expressing disdain towards mixed race people in ways that white people would get more easily canceled for.
look, I seriously doubt Vaush has any level of knowledge or authority making declarations like that, but sure.
You know, I think that a lot of POC, maybe not a lot of, a decent number of them, they understand that many of their negative experiences in life, which are a product of their race, are less seriously experienced by mixed race people. You know, like a very dark-skinned black person is subject to more severe racial bias than a light-skinned black person. That's true. There are studies to back it up. So a very dark-skinned black person might think, okay, well, a light-skinned black person is probably somewhere along the line mixed race. So they're not really black, and they're actually appropriating my struggle if they claim that they are, because et cetera, you know. The discourse rages on. What's weird is that this often gets, you know, sort of jokingly euphemized as like light skin versus black skin. Wait, sorry, light skin versus dark skin. They're both black. Discourse in a lot of places online, when it's fundamentally like a jokey version of a race struggle between pure blood and mixed race people of color. Like, it's actually really weird.
I mean, no, it's God, I hate that. It's an element of perceived privilege and ability to understand struggles which go on. It's not about the purity culture is very much more of a white thing. It's more of a white nationalist framework, and it's different when you're talking about marginalized groups. Like, naturally, gonna see. This is why black people don't. This is why a lot of black people don't like you, Vaush. And I'm white as hell, and I'm saying this because it's not. It's very. It's assuming aspects of the subculture that you're not a part of. I'm aware I'm not a part of that subculture. Like I said, I am super duper white. But at least I understand enough to know that I don't know. I don't think Vaush has that, but he speaks with authority as if he knows more than he does, and doesn't understand the potential microaggressions that he very frequently conveys.
Weird. Every once in a while, I see discourse online that I feel like is being pulled straight out of Stormfront, but it's not being treated that way because it's an intra-minority community discourse rather than like a between different races discourse, which would be more immediately framed as like a like a horribly racist thing. I think it reminds me a little bit of the TERF discourse, to be honest, where the TERFs are pretending that they think womanhood is defined like in part by lived experience, so a trans woman can't be a woman because they didn't, they oscillate back and forth between the biology thing and well, you didn't have the woman's experience, as though all women have the same experience. It's just
once again, there's a lot more nuance to, or at least anything I've seen. I mean, maybe I haven't seen, I haven't seen all discourse out there, admittedly, but
or trans growing up.
1 or 2 tenths of a second may be the difference in winning a race or finishing.
No, go.
But they use the perceived lack of an experience as a way to gatekeep the boundaries of their identity, which I guess happened here with the Frida Kahlo thing. And in a way, I feel like also with the Anne Frank thing, because impugning Anne Frank for being white is kind of the same thing.
It was a mild take. I don't know what the context is. No context was provided, but it was a mild take. It was just stating a fact that Vaush hasn't argued against the fact. He's just saying that it's bad and making a connection to something that's more obviously bad for the purpose of justifying positions he may have made online on Twitter, it seems. This is what it seems. I don't know his motivations. I can't know for sure. This is just the impression it's giving me.
As pushing her out of the non-white category, like white and non-white are the only two things anything can be. Because, you're pretty much in category A or B, no matter what. The very all-encompassing dynamic there. And if the impulse to point out that Anne Frank had white privilege was a product of somebody trying to argue that there are forms of visible and invisible lack of privilege, and that Anne Frank, by being white, was visibly privileged, but invisibly through Jewishness, non-privileged in the same way that white queer people are, this really does just kind of seem like a roundabout way of pushing somebody out of the category of legitimately visibly oppressed.
This is a series of assumptions based off of a tweet, and I feel like Vaush's eyes have just slowly looked. I feel like I could pause at any moment and it would make Vaush look. Vaush could be framed in several ableist ways, I'm sure, by almost any pause.
Which in a racialized dynamic does translate pretty well into the white or non-white framework. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that thinking about this is a gigantic waste of time, and every nanosecond of thought and every neuron that you dedicate to pondering whether or not people are being appropriately considerate of whether or not they may think that they have the appropriate skin tone or ancestry to weigh in on this. Think about anything else. Literally.
Okay, but But arguing against a point being made is equally just as much a waste of time. I mean, admittedly, I didn't know what to do today, so I just pulled this stuff very quickly.
Really anything else that you can. It's a complete waste of time. There is nothing here. There's literally nothing here. Even when it gets dressed up in academic jargon, I genuinely think it's a fucking waste of time. It's a descriptive versus prescriptive thing, okay? If academics, intellectuals, and Twitter dipshits alike want to like sit together and talk about like the incredible range of cultural experiences or like what people have gone through, what they've suffered or benefited from, what they think about things. Godspeed. You know, it's an accumulation of knowledge thing. But the moment this turns into an attempt to gatekeep whether or not other people have the right to do this.
Okay, but like nothing was listed to suggest gatekeeping. This is an argument about something that no evidence was provided that was made. So this is saying that this is gatekeeping, that this is saying that this is the same thing as a different, completely unrelated tweet. And so what Vaush has essentially done here is essentially created a set of false equivalency in which he has completely he's just like, oh, this is the same. No, it's not the same. They're completely different. One does actually attempt to gatekeep, potentially gatekeep rights, assuming that's not a troll, because there are trolls on Twitter who do stuff like that and create a version of the left to attack, and for them to latch onto to justify positions they have. Look, they're like this. No, nobody's like this. You're just a troll. But like, and effectively, Vaush has added a separate step, which is just to take an unrelated tweet, which got attacked and noticed, and said, hey, this tweet and this completely unrelated tweet are exactly the same, and therefore any argument I make against one tweet applies to another. Any argument I make against this one completely unrelated tweet justifies my argument against this tweet. It's
that the other based on some arbitrary like association or set of categories. I don't care. I have literally in my whole life I've never seen that discourse amount to anything. I'm honestly asking, have you guys? I'm really asking now. Have you ever in your life seen an instance of people online sitting down and going, I don't think this person has checked their privilege enough, or I don't think this person was of the appropriate skin tone to have this thought or opinion that I don't disagree with on its own, but I still don't think it should come from them. Have you ever seen that happen and something good has come from it? Because I really don't think I ever have. You know, obviously I'm a white boy, so my perspective isn't going to be the same as everyone else's, but like, I just never seen it happen.
I don't even know. Like, look, I mean, this seems to be more so an attack on the first one. The second one was just a statement of fact. It was a very tepid, mild tweet that got attacked because it mentioned white privilege. And then Vaush appears to have found a completely separate tweet about someone completely different, which gatekept, which the other tweet did not. It just said that Anne Frank had white privilege. That was essentially the point of the first tweet. But he's made it a whole argument against another tweet. It's like false equivalency and not scapegoating. Attacking straw person fallacy. He's attacking a straw person by using the other tweet.
Seems to be like a fundamental waste of time. It's a phenomenal psyop, you know, if done well. All it takes is you know, some 4chan troll on social media to talk about how Martin Luther King Jr. should have checked his male privilege or whatever, then scatter off while people, you know, start exploding with discourse in the comments. I don't know. This whole thing's been incredibly rambling. I'm so tired. I'll be streaming.
Yeah, no, I do feel like this is pointless, but like to some degree, but also it did give an insight into Vaush's the process which Vaush uses, and Vaush is not the only one who does stuff like this, but it's a good example of how someone can no, I didn't mean to say this, can go ahead and not make arguments that are based on factual occurrences, while still putting up the appearance of making arguments based off factual things.
That's right. It's once again time for me to spread my blatant pro-dog agenda. Look.
Oh yeah, by the way. This, super important. Doggos. We are ending with doggos. Because doggos are the most important.
It's not my fault. 6 years ago, I adopted a random mutt who turned out to be the world's cutest dog, and now I am unable to resist spreading the good news. Wait, is this a religion? Is India prophet? Or dare I say, prophet?
Apparently this person hasn't heard about the doggo religion that Bad Astra has brought up in the most adorable educational video ever. Where is it? Was it longer ago than I thought? Am I just not able to find stuff? Is it less time than I thought? Origin of Doggos. Okay, it was 2 days ago. I'm not gonna play this because I don't have the time to, but the great doggo religion.
Oh, great time. Don't you preach about a loving mom? Yes, the all-knowing and all-loving mom provides us with snuggles, treats, toys, and rubs.
Yes, the true doggo religion. Important.
Anyway, I'm actually going to start with a little content warning. While most of this video is going to be lighthearted and fun and interesting, I'm going to start by talking about guns and homicides and suicides. So if you'd like to skip that bit, just jump forward to this timestamp. The reason why I have Indy is in part because 6 years ago, there was a man...
Okay. Yes, I do want to skip that part, because doggos. 420.
I quickly came to the conclusion that a gun is not right for me. But what might be right for me? A dog. I'd never had a dog before as an adult, but I thought that having one might help. Something like a big German Shepherd or a pit bull that might be able to bite the shit out of a potential murderer, or at least scare a potential murderer away, or at the very least make me think that the dog could do those things and thus make me at least feel safer. So I adopted a puppy who I was told was a German Shepherd mix. They thought he was not at all. He's 35 pounds and he prances when he walks. He has butt curtains and ears that flop when he walks. He always looks happy. He's ridiculous. He couldn't intimidate a xenophobic squirrel. But it turns out he does make me safer. On the one hand, he really is good at alerting me when there's a stranger around, growling if someone approaches me when I don't want them to, and scaring off door-to-door salesmen. But on the other hand, he may actually keep everyone in my neighborhood safer, at least according to a new paper titled Paws on the Street, Neighborhood-Level Concentration of Households with Dogs and Urban Crime. In a survey of about 43,000 homes in and around Columbus, Ohio, researchers found that the presence of dogs in the neighborhood significantly reduced the number of property crimes like burglaries. The researchers also specifically looked at neighborhoods with a high level of trust, found by asking residents how much they trusted the average person on their street. Higher trust among neighbors is already associated with less crime in previous studies. But this
yeah, that might relate to like the fact that if you take care of a doggo, and if you're willing to do a good job taking care of a doggo, that generally is associated with being a good person. And both I mean, there might be a scientific study out there. I don't know.
This one showed that even in those neighborhoods with high levels of trust, more dogs still meant less robbery, less homicide, and less aggravated assault. So what's the idea? Are all these dogs roaming around the neighborhood biting criminals? Not exactly. The researchers think that the benefit might actually be due to the dog's owners. More people walking their dogs around a neighborhood means more eyes on the street to notice things that might be out of place and to dissuade nefarious actors from committing crimes. The researchers cite the work of Jane Jacobs, and I'm so glad they did because I ended up falling down a rabbit hole, and I learned a lot about a very interesting person. I had previously known about Robert Moses, who was an urban planner who was essentially a supervillain.
I mean, actually, that does make a lot more sense. This person said.
He was an inveterate racist who is responsible for destroying Black and Latino communities in New York by bulldozing their homes, building highways that cut them off from schools and parks, and even purposely building overpasses too low for city buses to go through, meaning that if you weren't rich enough to have a car or be able to take a taxi, you simply could not travel down certain corridors to access certain places like beaches. Yeah, you thought I was being hyperbolic when I called him a supervillain, weren't you? But that's some supervillain stuff. While I was aware of Moses and his horrific legacy, I had no idea that this supervillain actually had a nemesis, Jane Jacobs, a journalist who moved to Greenwich Village in the 1930s. In 1959, Robert Moses submitted plans for the village along with the area that would become
Chinatown and Little Italy to be bulldozed. 2,000 families and more than 400 buildings would be evicted, and more than 800 small businesses would be displaced for the plan. And the mostly non-white Lower Manhattan would essentially be walled off from the rest of the city. The city approved this plan in 1960. Jane Jacobs was horrified, and she leapt into action, organizing community rallies and forming the Joint Committee to stop the Lower Manhattan Expressway, roping in people like Margaret Mead and Eleanor Roosevelt to support her. She led these protests for 10 years, fighting Moses and his lackeys tooth and nail in City Hall and at rallies and in the newspapers, with the New York Times siding with Robert Moses and the New Village Voice paper siding with the neighborhoods. By 1971, Jacobs and the neighborhood activists won, and Moses' plan was canceled. Though she had no formal education,
Wait, the New York Times always being in favor of the corporate racist type? Shock.
Spent her entire life studying what makes a neighborhood a good neighborhood, what makes a city a happy place to live. She wrote one of the most influential books on urban planning, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, in which she argued that dense, mixed-use neighborhoods where people have a reason to walk around outside on the street, meeting each other and building trust, those are the neighborhoods that are safest and most likely to maintain order. That's where the concept of eyes on the street comes from, and that's why these researchers think that dogs help our neighborhoods. Anecdotally, I buy it. You know, as an adult, I've lived in dozens of different neighborhoods all over the US and even a few in London. And prior to getting indie, I never knew any of my neighbors. After, I know everybody. I know my neighbors' names. I know whether or not they like dogs. I know what they do for a living and what time they tend to be home, when they tend to go out for walks or be out in their yards. I know what their cars look like. And I know when a car is new to the neighborhood. And honestly, I never thought I would say this because I hate for people to be up in my business, but I love this. I love that my neighbors know me. You know, they drop off extra lemons that they pick from their trees. I love heading out to the grocery store and seeing them out for a walk and asking if they want me to pick them up anything. You know, I love that when
So like, obviously, and I'm sure this person would agree with that, it's a lot scarier to try to become friends with neighbors if you're in any marginalized community, because you don't know what sort of attitudes they might have until after you know them.
Indy and I found another dog wandering around. We knew exactly which house he had escaped from, and we could return the little scamp. I love that last week a neighbor texted me while on vacation and asked if I could go into his house to make sure the stove was off. Like, trust makes me feel happier and more fulfilled, and I'm more invested in making sure that my neighborhood stays happy and healthy and safe. Obviously, bad things will still happen in neighborhoods like this. Trust and eyes on the street aren't a silver bullet, but I'd rather have those things than any bullet at all. So if you want to be safer, don't get a gun. Get a dog. Take him for a walk.
And that is the most important thing. No, actually, unionizing apartment, a thing I should do, and I keep putting off, and I'm told, hey, why don't you just put the notes on the front and back door? And I'm like, oh yeah, that would be a lot easier and less stressful and whatnot, to promote the party. But it's for similar attitudes to the why dogs keep you safer, which is indirectly dogs keep you safer, it seems. And yeah, indirectly unionizing the place of living will keep you safer and keep the rent down. But also just organizing a community, like getting to know people in the building. It'll suck at first, but it'll probably be helpful in the long run. And that kitty just snuck. I saw the kitty. Yes. Anyways, I gotta go and feed the kitties. I hope you had a good time. If you liked the video, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, and actually, you know, like, whatever your comment is, it doesn't even have to be related to the video. And you can point out disagreements or whatnot in my analysis. I like to learn. And if I yawn, it's because I only got 5 hours. But that being said, have a wonderful time, everyone. I hope the rest, if you had a good Monday, I hope the rest of your Monday, the rest of your Mondays this week. Yes, all days of the week are Monday now. I hope the rest of your week is good, and if not, if your Monday was good, I hope the rest of the week is as good as today. And if your Monday today, if today was bad, I hope that the rest of your week will get better. And with that, just take care of yourselves and have a wonderful time. Bye.